Story 1. My parents blame me for everything. They kicked me out of the house at age 9. 15 years later, they want me to come back, just to save their reputation. When I was 9 years old, my life took a turn that I couldn't understand at the time. Now I'm 24 years old, and looking back, everything makes sense, although it's still just as painful. My parents always seemed to resent me, but I never understood why. From a very young age, I felt that I was more of a burden than a joy in their lives. They were young when they had me, barely leaving their own homes and facing adulthood. I understand, but it doesn't justify what happened afterwards. I remember specific moments that defined my childhood. There were no hugs, no words of encouragement, just strict rules and impossible-to-meet expectations. Every mistake I made, no matter how small, turned into an endless sermon about how I was ruining their lives. My grades were never good enough. My behaviors were the cause of constant scolding, but in front of others, we were always the perfect family. Everything exploded the day my mother announced that she was pregnant again. I was almost 9 years old and didn't fully understand what it meant. I only remember the euphoria on her face and the way her friends and family congratulated them. For a moment, I thought that things would change, that a new baby would bring some joy to our house, but the only thing it brought was my exile. A few weeks after that news, my mother began packing my things into boxes. It was as if I had ceased to exist for them. They told me that it would be better for everyone if I went to live with my uncle in another city. My world collapsed. The house where I grew up, my friends, my school, everything was going to disappear. I tried to plead, promised to improve my grades, behave better, be the son they wanted, but it was evident that their minds were already made up. I clearly remember the last day. My father took me to the bus station, and for the first time in a long time, he tried to explain to me why this was for the best. "It's not because we don't love you," he said, although his words sounded empty. "It's because we believe that you'll be better off with someone who can give you more attention." But even at my young age, I knew that it wasn't that. It wasn't about me being better off. It was about them getting rid of a problem. I arrived at my uncle's house crying, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they would call me and say that it was all a mistake, but that call never came. The first weeks were the most difficult. My uncle tried to console me, but he couldn't fill the void that my parents left. At night, I cried myself to sleep, wondering what I had done to deserve that. Little by little, my life with my uncle began to take shape. He was the complete opposite of my parents, patient, kind, and always willing to listen. It took me time to trust him, but eventually, I realized that his home was much warmer and safer than my old house had ever been. My performance in school improved, I made new friends, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something similar to happiness. But even while my life improved, the resentment towards my parents grew. They rarely called, and when they did, it was more out of courtesy than out of genuine concern. The only time they visited was to make sure that I was behaving better. They didn't care about my emotional well-being. They only wanted to validate their decision to have sent me away. The years passed, and although I learned to live without my parents, the memory of their rejection remained an open wound. I graduated from high school with honors, something that I never imagined in my darkest days. My uncle, who by then was more like a father to me, cried at my graduation ceremony, something that my parents would never have done. For them, I was no longer. But then, at 24 years old, just when I thought that I had finally left all that behind, I received a call that I never expected. It was my mother. The sound of her voice was like a punch in the chest. So much time had passed that I almost didn't recognize her, and although I wanted to hang up immediately, curiosity stopped me. "We want to talk to you," she said, trying to sound sweet. But her tone was so forced that I could almost feel the self-interest behind every word. "Your dad and I have been thinking a lot about you." Thinking about me? After 15 years of ignoring me? I felt a mixture of disbelief and anger, but I didn't say anything. Instead, I let her continue talking. She told me that things at home weren't going so well. My sister, who was now 15 years old, was acting out. She didn't go into details at first, but I could hear the stress in her voice. Then she blurted out the real reason for her call. "We think it would be good for you to come back and stay with us for a while, so that the family is united again." I had to bite my tongue not to laugh. United? Since when were we a united family? But I decided not to lose my calm. Instead, I asked her why, after so many years, they now wanted me to come back. There was an uncomfortable pause, and then she blurted it out. "It's just that we need to show people that we're a good family." That phrase hit me like a lightning bolt. It wasn't about me. It never had been. They wanted me to come back, not because they missed me or wanted to fix things, but because their reputation was at stake. Apparently, my sister had been causing a lot of problems, and people in their social circle were judging them as parents. They wanted to use me as living proof that they could raise good children. "So you want me to be your trophy?" I asked, my voice full of sarcasm. "It's not that." My mother responded quickly, but we both knew that it was. She tried to justify it, saying that they wanted to fix our relationship, but by then it was evident that everything was a farce. I hung up before she could say anything else and turned off the phone. My head was full of thoughts. I felt rage, sadness, and some relief for finally having the confirmation of what I had always suspected. My parents never really cared about me. A few days later, they called my uncle, probably thinking that they could convince him to persuade me to manipulate me. He told me everything, and as always, he supported me. "You don't have to do anything that you don't want to," he told me. I didn't answer their calls or messages for weeks, but they didn't give up. They kept insisting, sending messages that went from pleading to blaming me for abandoning them. According to them, I had a duty to help them because they were my parents. That was the trigger. My uncle encouraged me to face the situation directly, not because he believed that I should listen to them, but because he knew that sooner or later I needed to set a definitive boundary. So finally I responded. I asked them to meet with me in person, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to look them in the eyes and tell them everything that I had been holding in for years. When we met, I was surprised how different my parents looked. Always so concerned about appearances, they now seemed worn out. It was evident that the situation with my sister had affected them more than they wanted to admit. They began by talking about how proud they were of how far I had gotten in life. It was almost comical to hear that coming out of their mouths, considering that they had had absolutely nothing to do with my success. Then they moved on to what was important. They wanted me to return home to give them a second chance as a family. "We don't need a second chance," I told them calmly. "You need to accept that you're not good parents." My words left them in shock. For years, I had fantasized about that moment, but now that it was happening, I didn't feel satisfaction, just emptiness. I explained to them how they made me feel during my childhood, how they abandoned me, and how they never cared about me until it was convenient for them. They tried to interrupt several times, but I didn't allow it. Finally, I told them the truth that they needed to hear. I don't need a family that uses me as a trophy. The only family I have is my uncle, because he was there when you weren't. I stood up and left, leaving behind two people who had lost their right to call themselves my parents a long time ago. But the story doesn't end there. The meeting was only the beginning of a series of events that would reveal even more hidden truths and change my life and my sister's forever. After that meeting, I thought that I had finally finished with them, but I couldn't have been more wrong. What followed was a desperate attempt on the part of my parents to clean up their name at any cost. The first thing they did was try to manipulate other members of the family to intercede for them. My aunts, my grandparents, and even some cousins began to call me, asking me why I couldn't simply give them a chance. However, to my surprise, not everyone in the family was on my parents' side. My uncle, who raised me, spoke with several relatives to tell them the truth about what really happened years ago. Until then, many had assumed that my parents sent me to him because it was the best thing for me. No one knew the reality, that they simply wanted to get rid of me because I didn't fit into their vision of the perfect family. Meanwhile, my sister continued to be the center of the storm. Apparently, her behavior had worsened. The situation that started it all, and that my parents didn't mention in our meeting, was that she was caught smoking at a party. It wouldn't be something so shocking in a teenager, except that she was barely 15 years old. What really terrified them wasn't the act itself, but that it occurred in front of several friends and acquaintances of the family, who didn't hesitate to criticize my parents as if it were their favorite sport. "How did you let this happen? Where were you? It's obvious that you don't know how to raise your children." Those were the words that, according to what my parents later told me, they heard repeatedly that night. And instead of facing the reality of their failure as parents, they decided that the solution was to bring me back to show me as the successful son. But they didn't count on the fact that I was no longer the defenseless child that they could silence. My maternal grandparents, after learning what really happened, began to investigate more about how my sister had been raised. They realized that my parents had not only spoiled her, but had practically left her to her own devices. According to my grandparents, my parents gave her ridiculous amounts of money to keep her happy and let her do whatever she wanted to avoid confrontations. They created a monster, my grandmother told me over the phone, with a mixture of sadness and anger. And now they expect you to fix everything. It was then that my grandparents began to consider a radical measure, seeking custody of my sister. Although they didn't want to separate her completely from my parents, they believed that she needed a more structured environment to correct her path before it was too late. When my parents found out about this, it was as if the world was coming down on them. They began to call me frantically, accusing me of giving the grandparents ideas and of ruining their lives. But the truth was that I had done nothing. My parents had ruined it all on their own. Shortly after, my sister called me for the first time in years. She was nervous but curious. "Why do they say you're angry with them?" she asked. I didn't know exactly what to tell her. How to explain to a teenager that her parents were using her as a tool to clean up their reputation. So I was honest, but carefully. I told her how they had treated me when I was younger and how they sent me to live with our uncle. I also told her that I didn't blame her for anything because all of this was our parents' fault, not hers. There was a long silence before she responded. "They don't talk about you much either," she admitted. "They always said you were the problematic one, but now I'm not so sure." That conversation left me with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I felt sorry for my sister. She had been raised in a toxic environment, full of privileges but empty of true love or limits. On the other hand, I was glad that she was finally beginning to question the narratives that our parents had instilled in her. Meanwhile, my grandparents didn't stop. They sought legal advice, and after weeks of discussions, they managed to obtain temporary custody of my sister. My parents were furious, but they couldn't do much to prevent it, considering the mountain of evidence of negligence and poor upbringing that was accumulating against them. During this time, my relationship with my sister began to flourish. We talked on the phone almost every day. She told me about her life, her frustrations, and her fears. For the first time, I realized that I had not only lost my parents, I had also lost the opportunity to know my sister while growing up. "Do you think we could be a family someday?" she asked me one night with a vulnerability that broke my heart. "That depends on how we define family," I responded. "But if family means supporting each other and taking care of each other, then yes, I think we already are." My words seemed to relieve her a little, but I knew that the path ahead would be complicated. Meanwhile, my parents continued trying to save their image, but each attempt only sank them further into the contempt of family and friends. Over time, things began to calm down. My sister was slowly adapting to living with my grandparents, and although she was still somewhat rebellious, she began to show signs of change. For my part, I felt that I could finally breathe easy after years of tension. However, everything changed when my aunt, my father's sister, decided to talk to me. Until then, she had maintained a prudent distance in this whole family conflict. She was always kind to me, but she had never gotten too involved, at least not openly. However, one afternoon she called me and asked me to meet. Her voice had a strange tone, as if she was about to tell me something that she had been keeping for a long time. We met in a cafe, and from the moment we sat down, I knew that something important was going to come out of that conversation. After a few minutes of small talk, she finally took a deep breath and got to the point. "There are things that I think you need to know," she said with an apologetic tone. "Things that happened before you were sent to live with your uncle." What she told me was shocking. According to my aunt, my parents had been struggling financially since before I was born. They got married young, and my arrival was a surprise that complicated their situation even more. But what really complicated things was the dysfunctional relationship they had. "Your mother always felt that she sacrificed too much by having you," my aunt said, lowering her gaze. "And your father never knew how to handle that pressure. So instead of facing it together, they began to blame each other." What was even more disturbing was that apparently they had discussed the idea of giving me up for adoption when I was a baby. It was my maternal grandmother who intervened and convinced them to stay with me. But that decision wasn't the end of their problems. Over time, their mutual resentment was channeled towards me. "They saw in you everything that they couldn't handle," my aunt continued. "And when your mother got pregnant with your sister, they saw it as an opportunity to start over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents had not only sent me away out of convenience, they had done it as part of a deliberate plan to erase their past and focus on their new life. But here's what you really need to know, my aunt said, leaning forward. When they sent you to live with your uncle, they had no intention of ever looking for you again. It was your uncle who insisted that they continue sending you money. If it hadn't been for him, they probably wouldn't have even done that. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and surprisingly relief. I had always known that my parents didn't really love me, but hearing the details of how everything had happened gave me a kind of closure. I finally understood why I had always felt that I didn't fit into their life. After our conversation, my aunt apologized for not having spoken sooner. I wanted to protect you, but now I see that you deserve to know the truth. With this new information, I felt more determined than ever to protect my sister. Although I couldn't change my past, maybe I could help her avoid making the same mistakes that I had. Meanwhile, my parents continued trying to repair their reputation. My grandparents, seeing their lack of remorse and the evident negligence they showed towards my sister, decided to accelerate the process to obtain full custody. It was then that more truths began to come out, not only about their treatment of me, but also about how they had handled my sister's upbringing. My grandparents discovered that they had left my sister unsupervised on multiple occasions, allowing her to go to parties without limits and giving her absurd amounts of money to keep her content. This had not only affected her behavior, but had also led to more serious problems that my parents were trying to hide. When these revelations came to light, my parents began to lose the little support they had left in the family. Those who had previously defended them now moved away, and the criticism became increasingly strong. In the midst of all this, my sister and I continued to strengthen our relationship. She began to trust me in a way that I never imagined. She told me her fears, her frustrations, and how she felt lost in the chaos that our parents had created. "I always thought that you were the problem," she confessed to me one night during one of our long calls. "That's what they said, but now I'm not so sure." Those words hit me deeply. For years, I had carried the guilt of not being good enough for my parents. Hearing my sister recognize the truth made me feel that maybe we were finally breaking the cycle. After weeks of late-night calls with my sister and shocking revelations from my aunt and other relatives, it seemed that the family conflict was reaching its climax. My grandparents officially filed a request for full custody of my sister, and the hearings began to reveal more than any of us expected. In one of the first hearings, my grandparents presented evidence of my parents' negligence, from financial records that showed the irresponsible use of their income to testimonies from neighbors who had seen my sister loitering alone late at night. Everything seemed to confirm what the family already suspected. My parents had never been fit to raise either of their children. But the real blow came when my aunt was called to testify. Her account was devastating. She described how my parents had debated getting rid of me since my birth, how they had ignored their responsibilities as parents, and how even now with my sister, they continued repeating the same patterns. My parents' defense was weak. They tried to blame me for influencing my sister from afar, despite the fact that we had barely spoken until a few months ago. They also tried to pass off their decisions as well-intentioned mistakes, but it was evident that no one in the room believed them. While this was happening, my relationship with my sister continued to grow. Each call, each message strengthened our bond. She began to trust my grandparents more, who with patience and love were working to give her the stability she never had. But there were also moments of struggle. My sister was full of anger and resentment, not only towards our parents, but also towards herself. "Do you think I'm already ruined?" she asked me one night, her voice barely a whisper. "No," I responded without hesitation. "What we've been through doesn't define us. What we do next does." That conversation marked a turning point. My sister began attending therapy, something that my grandparents insisted was necessary. At first, she hated it, but over time she began to open up and face the demons that she had accumulated for years. For my part, although I was glad to see her progress, I still had unfinished business with my parents. After the initial hearings, they tried to approach me again, this time with a mixture of pleas and emotional manipulation. "You're our son, at the end of the day," my mother said in a call. "We just want to fix things." But I knew that it wasn't true. Every word was imbued with selfishness. They didn't want to fix things out of love. They wanted to do it because they needed to restore their image. Finally, I decided to meet with them one last time, not to reconcile, but to close this chapter once and for all. We met in a public park, a neutral place. When I saw them, I realized how much they had changed. They seemed defeated, but there was still a spark of pride in their eyes, as if they believed that they could still control the narrative. I'm not here to argue, I told them as we sat down. I just want to make something clear. I don't need anything from you, and I don't expect you to need anything from me. My father opened his mouth to respond, but I stopped him. Let me finish. I explained to them that my life had improved thanks to the distance I maintained from them, and that there was no possibility of me returning to their orbit. I told them that if they really wanted to prove that they had changed, it wasn't me who they had to convince, but my sister. There was a long silence after that. My mother seemed on the verge of tears, while my father simply looked at the ground. Finally, I got up and left, knowing that I had said everything I needed to say. The following weeks were a whirlwind of changes. My grandparents won full custody of my sister, and she began to flourish under their care. She joined a sports team at her school, something that she had never considered before, and began to surround herself with friends who truly supported her. For my part, I felt that a weight was lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the burden of proving myself to myself or to anyone else. I had made peace with my past, and although the pain was still there, it no longer defined me. The last thing I heard from my parents was that they tried to move to another city to start over, away from the critical looks of family and friends. I don't know if they managed to find the peace they were looking for, but I know that it's not something that concerns me anymore. As for my sister and I, we continue building our relationship. We talk almost every day, and recently she came to visit me in the city where I live. We spend hours recalling moments from our childhood and dreaming about the future, one that finally feels full of possibilities. Story 2. My sister forced me out of my own house on the day of her baby shower. When my parents discovered that I had suffered a panic attack, they canceled all support for her baby. I grew up in a family where tensions were always on the surface. My sister, from a young age, was the star, always dramatic, always demanding attention. I was the oldest, but I seemed the most invisible. When she announced that she was pregnant, I confessed that I was genuinely happy for her, but at the same time, something inside me knew that chaos was about to begin. I wasn't wrong. It all started a few months ago when my sister decided that she would have the baby shower at my house. Yes, at my house. The justification: your house is prettier and more welcoming. I hesitated because I knew exactly how it would be. She would control everything, make decisions as if the place were hers, and in the end, I would still be left as the ungrateful one. But as always, I accepted. My whole life was marked by avoiding conflicts with her. My husband, poor thing, although he wasn't convinced, wanted to support me. It will only be one day, he told me. We'll be able to put up with it. How naive we were. The day of the baby shower arrived, and early on, my house was transformed into something unrecognizable. Balloons everywhere, tables full of sweets, and decorations that competed with each other to see which one took up more space. My sister arrived early, accompanied by her friends, and began to give orders as if she were the director of a big-budget movie. It didn't bother me so much until I saw how she was moving my things without even asking. My favorite plant, an anniversary gift from my husband, ended up on the balcony because it didn't match the theme. The straw that broke the camel's back was when one of her friends asked me to try not to be too in the way during the event. According to her, I was too serious and could ruin the fun atmosphere. My sister not only didn't defend me but laughed and added, "Well, she has always been the boring one in the family." I felt a knot in my chest, but I didn't say anything. I told myself that it was best to let it pass, as always, but the worst was yet to come. During the baby shower, my brother organized a game where everyone had to share a wish for the baby. I didn't participate because I was in the kitchen, trying to keep myself busy so I wouldn't break down emotionally. My sister, apparently annoyed because I wasn't participating, called me to the center of the room. In front of everyone, she asked me if I had something against her baby, which was humiliating. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for me to say something, but I was too ashamed to articulate a word. After that scene, my anxiety was out of control. I felt as if the walls of my own home were closing in on me. I locked myself in my room, trying to calm down, but even there my sister looked for me. She knocked on the door and with a smile, said, "Come on, don't ruin my day. It's my moment to shine." That was the last straw. I left the room, grabbed my keys, and left. I left everyone behind, including my own house. While walking through the nearby park, trying to calm my breathing, my husband called me worried. I explained to him what had happened, and he rushed back home to confront my sister. I don't know what he told her, but when I returned, the baby shower was ending. However, I wasn't prepared for what would come next. When I returned home after walking for hours, I expected to find some calm. Instead, what greeted me was absolute chaos. My husband was in the living room with his arms crossed, clearly frustrated, and my sister, in tears, was surrounded by her friends, who were trying to console her as if she were the victim. Upon seeing me, she gave me a look of pure contempt. "How could you leave and ruin my day like that?" she screamed while one of her friends muttered something about how selfish I was. My husband intervened before I could respond. "Ruin your day? She had to leave because you humiliated her in her own house. This is not a party room. It's our home, and you had no right to treat her like that." My sister let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, please, what did she do so wrong? I only asked her not to be so bitter. If she can't stand a little attention on my special day, maybe the problem is hers, not mine." At that moment, something inside me broke. I had endured years of her snubs, her insults disguised as jokes, her need to be the center of attention. But seeing her act as if I were the guilty one, as if my reaction were unjustified, filled me with an anger that I didn't know I had. "Do you really think that everything revolves around you?" I responded, my voice trembling with contained rage. "You've taken over my house, moved my things, ridiculed me in front of your friends, and made me feel like an intruder in my own space. And now you dare to blame me for not wanting to be here." Silence filled the room for a moment, but my sister didn't take long to respond. "This isn't about you. You always do this. You always find a way to victimize yourself and ruin things for me. You can't stand that I have something special, right?" Before I could respond, my husband approached and pointed to the door. "Enough is enough. You have to leave. This is not your house, and after what you did today, you're not welcome here for a good time." My sister's friends began to protest, but my husband was firm. One by one, they began to gather their things, while my sister continued whining and complaining loudly. In the end, with a last, "You'll never support me like a real family would," she left, slamming the door. Finally, there was silence, but instead of feeling relief, what I felt was an overwhelming emptiness. I collapsed, and my husband hugged me, whispering words of comfort. But I couldn't stop thinking about how unfair everything was, how we had reached this point. How could my sister be so selfish? The next day, my parents called me. I knew that they were on my sister's side even before answering. They had always been doing this, excusing her whims and behaviors as if they were something inevitable. But this time it was different. When I answered, my mother sounded worried, almost scared. "What happened last night?" she asked with a cautious tone. I explained everything, from how my sister had taken over my house to how she had ridiculed me in front of everyone. There was silence on the other side of the line, and for a moment I thought that my mother would say that I was exaggerating. But then, to my surprise, she said, "This has gone too far. I had no idea that she treated you like that." It wasn't the reaction I expected. Normally, my mother would have found some way to justify my sister's behavior, but something in her tone suggested that this time she was genuinely upset. Then I heard my father intervene in the background, his voice firm and determined. "We're going to talk to her. This can't stay like this." The next thing I knew was that my parents confronted my sister directly. According to what they told me later, they confronted her about her behavior in my house and demanded that she apologize. She, of course, refused. Instead of accepting her responsibility, she cried and said that no one supported her and that I was ruining her experience of being a mother. My parents' reaction was something that I never would have expected. They decided to withdraw all the financial support that they had promised her for the baby. My parents had always been generous with us, helping us in the important moments of our lives. But this time, they decided that her behavior had crossed a line. My sister didn't take it well. That same night, I received dozens of text messages from her. At first, they were insults. She blamed me for everything, for my parents withdrawing their support, for her partner distancing himself, even for her friends starting to question her. According to her, I had sabotaged her entire life. When I didn't respond, she returned to the insults, more cruel than before. Despite everything, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone in this. My parents finally saw what I had endured for years. But I knew that this was only the beginning. My sister wasn't going to give up so easily. Several days passed after the confrontation with my parents. Although I felt relieved that they finally saw the truth, I couldn't avoid a constant knot in my stomach. I knew my sister too well. Her resentment knew no limits, and I knew that she would find a way to get back at me. It didn't take long to happen. The first blow came when my husband found a series of publications on social media that my sister had made. In them, she described me as an envious, sabotaging, an enemy of her happiness. She said that I was jealous of her and her pregnancy, and that I had always tried to overshadow her in every important moment of her life. The publications were full of supportive comments from her friends and acquaintances, all sharing her indignation without even knowing what had really happened. My name wasn't explicitly mentioned, but it was obvious to anyone who knew our family that she was talking about me. I tried to ignore it, but things got worse when some relatives started calling me to clarify what was happening. An aunt who had always been close to my sister asked me directly, "Why are you determined to make her life so difficult? She's just trying to enjoy her pregnancy, and you're putting stones in her way." I couldn't believe it. I tried to explain to her what had happened, but it was useless. She had already taken sides. It was then that I understood the scope of what my sister was doing. She was building a narrative where she was the victim and I was the villain, and the worst thing is that it was working. While this was happening, my mother tried to remain neutral. Despite having withdrawn financial support from my sister, she kept asking me to let things pass and to try to make peace. "Understand that she's stressed. Honey, she's pregnant. Her emotions are out of control." I wanted to scream at her that her constant indulgence towards my sister was part of the problem, but I restrained myself. I had learned long ago that arguing with my mother about this topic was like talking to a wall. My father, on the other hand, was furious. He called me several times to make sure that I didn't give in to my sister's pressures. "This is not your fault, and you don't have to endure it anymore. Enough is enough," he said with a tone of voice that he rarely used. I felt his support as a small bomb in the middle of the chaos, but my sister didn't stop. One afternoon, while I was returning from the supermarket, I found a box at my door. Upon opening it, I discovered a series of broken objects, photos of our childhood, a couple of letters that I had written to her in years past, even a pendant that I had given her when we were children. There was a note written on crumpled paper that said, "I don't want anything that comes from you anymore. You're dead weight in my life." Upon reading it, I felt a mixture of sadness and rage. It was clear that she had no limits. My husband, seeing my state, took the paper and tore it. He hugged me and promised that he wouldn't let her continue attacking me. But we both knew that this situation was affecting our peace of mind and, more importantly, my well-being. A week later, my sister appeared at my house unannounced. My husband and I had decided to ignore all her messages and calls, but clearly that didn't stop her. She knocked on the door repeatedly, screaming that she needed to talk to me. My husband suggested not opening, but something inside me made me do it. Maybe a small part of me wanted to believe that she was there to apologize. When I opened the door, I was met with her distraught face, her eyes swollen from so much crying. However, there was no remorse in her expression, only a contained fury that chilled my blood. "This is your fault," she screamed, pointing at me as if I were a criminal. "My parents left me without support, my friends are starting to question me, and now my partner doesn't even want to talk to me. Are you happy? Is that what you wanted?" I tried to remain calm, but my hands were trembling. "This is not my fault. You yourself created this problem with your attitude and your decisions." That made her explode. She entered without invitation, pushing me aside, and began to scream even louder, claiming that I had always been our parents' favorite, that they had always given me everything, while she was treated as if she were disposable. It was such an absurd accusation that I didn't even know how to respond. The next thing she did paralyzed me. She walked towards the living room, where we had framed the first ultrasound of our future baby. Without thinking twice, she took the frame and threw it on the floor, breaking it into 1,000 pieces. "If I can't be happy, you won't be either," she screamed before giving me one last look of contempt and running out of the house. That night, while sweeping up the pieces of glass from the floor, I felt a deep sadness take over me. My sister was not only trying to destroy my peace, she was attacking what was most precious to me, my family, my home, my son. My husband suggested taking more drastic measures. "This can't continue like this. We need to distance ourselves from her, cut off all contact." I knew that he was right, but it was easier said than done. I had spent my whole life trying to maintain peace with my sister, and now it seemed that all that had been useless. However, something inside me began to change. For the first time, I began to consider the possibility of setting real boundaries, even if that meant completely cutting off contact. After the incident with the ultrasound, something inside me broke. I spent hours that night sitting in the living room, observing the remains of the frame and the decorations that still remained from the baby shower. My husband, always my rock, tried to convince me to stop thinking about it, but I knew that I couldn't continue ignoring the situation. My sister wasn't going to stop, not while she felt that she could still manipulate me. It was time to make decisions, however painful they were. The next day, I called my parents. I knew that it would be a difficult conversation, but I needed to set clear boundaries, even with them. My mother answered with her usual tone, trying to sound conciliatory. "Honey, we know that Emily crossed a line, but she's going through a lot. You know how she is, she's just overwhelmed." I took a deep breath before responding. "Mom, I can't keep listening to those excuses. No matter how much stress she has, what she did was unacceptable. She entered my house, broke something that means a lot to me, and treated me as if I had no right to my own life. I can't keep allowing this." My father intervened at that moment, his tone firmer than my mother's. "You're right. We already talked to Emily, and we're not going to justify what she did, but I need to know what you plan to do." I didn't expect that question. I was silent for a moment before responding. "I'm going to cut off contact with her, at least for a while. I don't want to know anything more about her dramas, and I don't want her to come to my house. It's the only thing I can do for my own peace of mind." My mother tried to protest, but my father interrupted her. "If that's what you need, we'll support you. Emily will have to face the consequences of her actions." Although I felt some relief upon hearing my father's support, I knew that my mother didn't completely agree. Even in her silence, I could feel the tension. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I had spent too much time worrying about the feelings of my sister and others. It was time to worry about myself. During the following weeks, the situation seemed to calm down. My husband and I focused on preparing the baby's room, trying to recover some normalcy. However, in the back of my mind, I was always waiting for my sister's next move. Knowing her, I knew that she wasn't going to stay quiet for long, and I was right. One afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. Upon opening it, my heart sank. It was a very long message, full of insults and recriminations. My sister blamed me for everything, for my parents withdrawing their support, for her partner distancing himself, even for her friends starting to question her. According to her, I had sabotaged her entire life. I ignored the message, but that same night another arrived, this time directed at my husband. In it, my sister tried to convince him that I was the cause of all our problems, and that he should reconsider being with me. My husband, of course, didn't take long to block the number, but I knew that this was just the beginning. Shortly after, I received an unexpected call from my sister's partner. At first, I thought it would be another confrontation, but his tone was completely different. He was tired, almost defeated. "I just wanted you to know that I'm very sorry," he said with a sigh. "I know that Emily has been difficult, but I can't handle it anymore. I'm thinking about ending the relationship." I didn't know what to say. On the one hand, I understood his position perfectly. I had lived with her behavior my whole life. On the other hand, I didn't want to be the reason why his relationship ended. I tried to be honest without getting too involved in his decisions. "I'm very sorry. I can't tell you what to do, but I hope that you find the peace you need, whatever your decision." Upon hanging up, I felt strangely relieved, not for his possible breakup, but because finally someone else saw what I had endured for years. But that relief didn't last long. A few days later, my parents came to visit me. While we were having coffee in the living room, my mother, visibly uncomfortable, brought up the topic of Emily. "Honey," she called me. "She says she wants to talk to you, that she's willing to apologize." I looked at my mother in disbelief. After everything that had happened, did she really expect me to give her another chance? Before I could respond, my father intervened. "You can't force her love. Emily needs to understand that her actions have consequences. We can't keep sweeping everything under the rug." My mother sighed, clearly divided between protecting my sister and supporting me. But for the first time, she didn't try to pressure me. She simply changed the subject, and for the rest of the visit we avoided talking about the matter. The real blow came a few days later when my husband received an envelope by mail. Inside, There was an anonymous letter full of terrible accusations, that I was a negligent wife, that I wasn't prepared to be a mother, and that my mental health was a danger to my future child. Although it wasn't signed, I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Emily. Upon reading it, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. How had it come to this? How could someone hate me so much, especially my own sister? My husband wanted to take the letter directly to my parents, but I stopped him. I knew that confronting her would only fuel her narrative that I was the villain. Instead, I made the most difficult decision I had made in my life: cut off all contact with her. I blocked her number, deleted her messages, and asked my family not to mention me anymore in their conversations with her. It was a painful step, but I knew that it was necessary to protect my peace and that of my family. However, I knew that this wouldn't be the end. With Emily, nothing ever was. After cutting off all contact with my sister, I felt a momentary relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. However, that tranquility soon turned into a kind of constant vigilance. Although I had blocked her number and deleted any trace of her from my social media, I couldn't help but feel that something more was coming, and I was right. A few days later, while my husband and I were finishing organizing the baby's room, my mother called. It wasn't a casual call. I could feel the urgency in her voice from the moment I answered. "Emily showed up here this morning," she said, pausing to sigh deeply. "She's furious, but she also seems lost. She says that you've destroyed her life and that no one is on her side." I felt a knot in my stomach upon hearing those words. As much as I tried to distance myself emotionally, it was difficult not to feel a small glimmer of guilt. I knew that my mother expected me to say something conciliatory, but I could no longer carry that responsibility. "Mom, I can't do anything more for her. I've endured too much, and now I have to protect myself and my baby. If Emily is so lost, she needs professional help, not another superficial apology from me." There was a long silence before my mother murmured a weak, "I understand." It was the first time in my whole life that she didn't try to pressure me to give in to Emily's demands. Although it was clear that it hurt her, I think she had finally accepted that her youngest daughter wouldn't change with simple words. But Emily wasn't going to give up so easily. That same afternoon, while my husband and I were enjoying a quiet time watching a movie, someone knocked on the door insistently. I looked through the window and felt a chill upon recognizing her silhouette. It was Emily. My husband, always protective, was the one who approached the door. Without opening it, he spoke to her from the other side. "Emily, you can't be here. We ask you to respect our space." She responded with a tone that oscillated between desperation and anger. "I just want to talk to her. Is that too much to ask? I need her to understand what she has done to me." "There's nothing to discuss," my husband responded firmly. "The best thing for everyone is for you to leave." There was a moment of silence, followed by a loud bang against the door. Then we heard her walking away, cursing and screaming things that we barely managed to understand. Although she didn't manage to enter, that incident made it clear that she wasn't going to accept the limit that we had established. The next day, I made the decision to inform my parents about what had happened. My father was furious upon hearing that Emily had appeared at my house, especially after I made it clear to her that I didn't want contact with her. "This has to stop. We can't keep allowing her to act as if there are no consequences," he said with determination. To my surprise, my mother agreed. Although it hurt her to admit it, she recognized that Emily needed serious help. However, she also made it clear that she didn't believe that it was their responsibility to force her to seek it. "She's an adult. If she doesn't want to change, no one can do it for her," my mother said, her voice full of sadness. That same day, my father left a message for Emily, warning her that if she came near me or my house again, we would take legal action. It was a tough but necessary decision. The following weeks were relatively quiet. Emily stopped trying to contact me directly, although she continued making passive-aggressive publications on social media that our relatives shared with me despite my insistence that they not do so. Finally, I decided to eliminate several contacts from social media to protect my peace of mind. However, the most shocking thing occurred when I received an unexpected message. Emily's ex-boyfriend wanted to talk to me. I hesitated before responding, but finally agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. When we spoke, I was surprised by his tone. It wasn't accusatory, nor was it full of resentment. He seemed like someone who, like me, had been deeply affected by Emily's behavior. I just wanted to tell you that I'm very sorry for everything you've been through, he said. After what I lived with her, I completely understand why you made the decision to cut off contact. It was the best thing you could do. He told me that after ending their relationship, Emily had begun to harass him. Constant calls, messages full of reproaches. She had even appeared at his workplace in an attempt to reconcile. Finally, he had to file a restraining order to protect himself. Although I wasn't glad to hear about his suffering, his words made me feel less alone. For the first time, someone who wasn't part of my family understood exactly what I had endured for years. Finally, after months of chaos, my husband and I made a decision that we had been secretly considering: moving. His family lived in another state, in a quiet community where we could start over, far from the constant drama. We decided not to tell anyone, except my parents, until everything was ready. When I informed my parents, my father was understanding, although he was clearly hurt by the idea of me moving away. My mother, on the other hand, seemed devastated, but she didn't try to stop me. I think she finally understood that this was the only way to protect my peace and that of my family. The move was an emotional but also liberating process. We left behind our house, and with it all the wounds that Emily had caused. In our new community, far from her reach, we finally found the calm that we had longed for so much. To this day, I have no contact with Emily. According to what my parents told me, she continues to blame me for everything that went wrong in her life, but it no longer affects me. I have learned to prioritize my well-being and that of my family above anything else. My son was born healthy and strong, and now every day is filled with laughter and love. Finally, I can say that I have found peace, and I am determined not to let anyone take it away from me again. Story 3. My younger brother married my ex-wife after she left me for him, and now my family wants me to be the best man at the wedding. I am 34 years old, and until 2 years ago, I was married to Ava, who was my girlfriend since college. We were together for more than a decade before getting married. I always thought that what we had was solid, that we had overcome all the major obstacles together: the long work hours, the economic pressures, the family problems. But it seems that there was something that I never saw coming. To understand how everything fell apart, I first need to give a little context about my family. I am the eldest son, and I have a younger brother, Liam, who is now 31. Since we were children, Liam was always our parents' favorite, the golden boy, as I call him in my head. I was the responsible one, the one who had to meet expectations without making much noise. While I got good grades and did the right thing, Liam was the one who always received praise, even if he didn't do anything exceptional. For example, when I was accepted into a prestigious university with a partial scholarship, my parents barely mentioned it at dinner. However, when Liam decided to find himself traveling through Europe with our parents' money, of course, they organized a big party to say goodbye. Things like that were repeated throughout our childhood and adolescence. Liam was always the center of attention, while I remained in the shadows, trying not to make waves. Despite that, I tried not to resent him. He is my brother, after all, and although I often felt displaced, I convinced myself that it wasn't worth ruining our relationship over something that, in theory, wasn't his fault. Maybe that's why I never saw the signs of what was to come. When I met Ava in college, I felt that I finally had something that was completely mine. She was intelligent, fun, and ambitious, with a dry sense of humor that I loved. We got along incredibly well from the beginning, and it didn't take long before we started dating. My parents weren't particularly excited, but they didn't seem to have major objections either. In retrospect, I think they simply didn't care that much. They were always more focused on Liam. We got married when I was 27 and Ava 24. The wedding was beautiful, although not particularly big. It was exactly what we wanted, something intimate and full of love. During the first years of our marriage, everything went quite well. We both worked hard, but we always made time to enjoy ourselves together. We lived in a small apartment in Chicago. We didn't have much money, but we felt happy. Liam, at that time, had just returned from his trip through Europe. As expected, my parents received him as if he had conquered the continent. He returned with grand plans to start his own business, although, like many of his projects, it never materialized. What he did do was appear more often in our lives. At first, it didn't bother me. After all, he is my brother, and I thought that it was good that he got along well with Ava. But over time, his visits began to be too frequent. always with some weak excuse. I was nearby. I wanted to stop by and say hello. I brought coffee for you guys. Ava seemed to enjoy his company, and I didn't see anything strange in it until everything changed. One day, I arrived home early from work and found Liam and Ava laughing on the sofa, sharing a moment that seemed more intimate than it should be. They weren't doing anything explicit, but something in the way they looked at each other made me deeply uncomfortable. When they saw me, they startled as if they had been caught doing something they shouldn't. I convinced myself that I was being paranoid, that I was just imagining things because I had had a bad day, but that was the first moment that I started to notice that something was out of place. The following weeks were full of small signs. Ava began to be more distant, less affectionate. She left early for work and returned late, saying that she had a lot of meetings or that she was staying with her friends. Liam, on the other hand, kept appearing at our house more often than was reasonable. I began to feel that something was happening, but I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself. Everything came crashing down one night that I still remember with painful clarity. Ava said that she was going out with her friends, and I, feeling restless, decided to go out too to clear my head. I didn't know where to go, so I ended up driving without a fixed destination. It was then when I saw Ava's car parked in front of Liam's apartment. My heart sank. I tried to convince myself that there was some logical explanation, but I knew that it wasn't so. I stayed in the car, looking at the illuminated window of Liam's apartment, until I finally saw Ava leave. But she wasn't alone. Liam accompanied her, and the way they said goodbye, a hug that was too intimate, a smile that seemed to be reserved for him, confirmed my worst suspicions. I returned home that night without saying anything. I felt trapped, powerless. How to confront the person you love when you suspect that they are betraying you with your own brother? That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed on the sofa, looking at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had reached that point. I can't adequately describe what I felt that night as I lay awake staring at the living room ceiling. It was as if a wave of disbelief was hitting me over and over again. Could Ava and Liam really be doing something like this to me? On the one hand, I didn't want to believe it. On the other hand, the pieces were beginning to fit together in a painful way. I remembered the knowing looks, the laughter between them that had seemed normal to me, but now felt suspicious, and all those times that Liam found some excuse to visit us. I spent the next day completely disconnected from the world, trying to gather the courage to confront Ava. She arrived home that night as if nothing had happened, tired but apparently content. I saw her enter with her usual smile, and I felt trapped between anger and pain. I couldn't face her at that moment. I simply didn't know how to do it without everything falling apart. A few more days passed, and while I was trying to process everything, I decided to talk to my mother. Maybe it wasn't the best idea, considering how she had always defended Liam no matter what he did, but I thought that, at the very least, I could seek advice. When I explained my suspicions to her, her reaction left me frozen. She didn't seem surprised at all. In fact, what she said broke my heart even more. Maybe Ava and Liam have a more natural connection. Maybe you should try to understand that. Understand what? That my wife, the woman with whom I had built a life, might be involved with my brother? That my mother, instead of defending me, seemed to justify it? I left her house feeling like a stranger in my own family. The betrayal of my mother added to the growing mountain of pain that I was already carrying. Finally, one Saturday afternoon, I gathered the necessary courage to talk to Ava. We had been in this strange distance for weeks, and I needed answers. I waited for her in the living room while she returned from the gym, with my heart beating like a drum. When she entered, I greeted her calmly, but she immediately noticed that something was wrong. "We have to talk," I told her, trying to keep my voice firm. She sat on the sofa in front of me, clearly uncomfortable. As I began to speak, I explained what I had been noticing, her distant behavior, the long absences, the times I had seen Liam around our life more than necessary. I tried to remain calm, but my voice began to break when I mentioned having seen her leaving Liam's apartment that night. The color abandoned her face. She didn't say anything for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Finally, she let out a sigh and began to cry. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she murmured through tears. That confession was like a knife in the chest. At that moment, my whole world came crashing down. The exact words of what she said after that are blurred in my memory, but I remember how she tried to justify the unjustifiable. She said that it had started as something casual, A moment of confusion when Liam showed himself to be vulnerable and she felt attracted by his energy. According to her, it hadn't been something planned, but neither was it a mistake. I couldn't listen anymore. I confronted her with a mixture of screams and desperate questions. How could she have done this to me? Why with Liam of all people? Had I done something wrong? Despite her crying and her apologies, the anger and the pain in my chest didn't let me give in. That night, I asked her to leave the house. She tried to protest, but my decision was irrevocable. After Ava left, everything became a whirlwind. Days passed in which I barely ate, barely slept. My friends tried to support me, but how to explain something so devastating to them? Every time I mentioned it, I saw the disbelief and the horror on their faces. Even my friends who had known Ava and Liam for years couldn't understand how something like that had happened. The worst came when I tried to confront Liam. I went to his apartment, still full of rage and looking for answers. When he opened the door, his nonchalant attitude disarmed me. He acted as if what he had done wasn't a big deal. We didn't want it to happen like this, but Ava and I, well, we simply connected. He said it as if it were something casual, as if he hadn't just destroyed his own brother's life. What he said after that chilled my blood even more. I always thought that she was out of your reach. Maybe now you can find someone more suitable. Those words made me lose control. For a moment, I thought about hitting him, but I restrained myself. Screaming at him was useless. He showed no remorse, not even a shred of shame. My parents, as expected, aligned themselves with Liam. My mother said something that left me speechless. Maybe this is for the best for everyone. Ava and Liam seem happy together. My father, as always, avoided confronting me directly, but his silence was just as damning. They were more interested in protecting Liam than in supporting me. In a matter of weeks, my marriage had ended, my relationship with my brother was destroyed, and my connection with my parents was irreparable. I didn't know how to move forward. I felt as if I were in a well that I couldn't climb out of. After Ava left the house that night, I found myself living in an emotional vacuum. The routine that we had built together for years was now a painful echo. Every corner of the apartment reminded me of her. The sofa where we used to watch movies, the table where we had dinner and talked about our days. Now, all that was a constant reminder of her betrayal. And worst of all, my family, the people on whom I should have been able to lean, were on Liam's side. I tried to stay busy, focusing on work and avoiding any unnecessary interaction. However, the world didn't seem willing to leave me alone. Less than a week after the confrontation, I received a call from my mother. At first, I thought it might be an apology, or at least an attempt to reach out to me, but what she said left me speechless. "Your brother and Ava have decided to get engaged," she said with a disturbing serenity, as if she were talking about something trivial, not about the fact that my ex-wife and my brother were planning to get married. I couldn't respond immediately. The words simply wouldn't come. Engaged? So soon after Ava and I had broken up? My mother continued talking, ignoring my silence. "They wanted you to know directly before they announced it. And well, Liam has asked you to be his best man." It was then that I let out a bitter laugh. Best man? In what universe did they think that I would be willing to stand next to them at an altar, pretending that everything was okay? My mother, upon hearing my reaction, seemed offended. "You can't keep holding grudges, Oliver. We're a family. Everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is forgiveness." That comment made me explode. "Forgiveness," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You're asking me to forgive my brother for stealing my wife and to stand by his side as if nothing had happened? What kind of family is this?" My mother didn't respond directly. As always, she diverted the topic, insisting that Liam and Ava had found something special and that I should be happy for them. It was as if I were living in an alternate world where the pain and the betrayal that I felt had no importance. I hung up the phone and turned off my mobile for the rest of the day. I couldn't bear to hear anything more from my family. During that week, I faced a barrage of text messages from my parents, from Liam, and even from some cousins who had heard rumors and thought they should intervene. The messages ranged from clumsy attempts to console me to blatant attempts to make me feel guilty. Phrases like, "Family is the most important thing," and "You should support your brother," filled my screen. It was as if no one understood or wanted to understand what was happening. But what really pushed me to the limit was when a mutual friend sent me a screenshot. Ava had announced her engagement with Liam on social media. In the photo, they were both smiling in front of a sunset with a caption that said, We found our way in the middle of the storm. The number of comments congratulating them was astounding. Friends from college, acquaintances, even some relatives, all applauding their unexpected love. I read the comments in disbelief. Some even said things like, "What a beautiful couple," and "Destiny brought them together." My blood boiled. Destiny? What kind of destiny justified destroying a marriage and betraying your own brother? What hurt me the most was seeing that several of those comments came from people who knew our story, who knew who I was. I decided to disconnect completely from social media. I didn't want to keep seeing how this false narrative of true love continued to develop. Instead, I focused on surviving each day. I began to look for a therapist, something that I had never considered before, but I felt that it was necessary if I wanted to remain functional. Talking to someone impartial helped me to organize my thoughts, although it didn't eliminate the pain. Meanwhile, Liam and Ava continued to move forward with their wedding plans. One day, without prior notice, Liam appeared at my apartment. He was standing there in front of my door as if it were a normal visit, with a bottle of whiskey in his hand. "I thought we could talk like brothers," he said with that carefree smile that he had always had. I looked at him in disbelief. Talk? After everything he had done? But something in me wanted to listen to him, perhaps because I still had a foolish hope that he would offer a sincere apology. I let him in, although every fiber of my being was screaming at me not to do it. We sat in the living room, and Liam began to talk. He tried to justify what had happened, saying that he had never planned to fall in love with Ava, but that he couldn't help it. According to him, it was something inevitable, as if the love he felt for her exonerated him from any responsibility. While he spoke, he drank quietly from the whiskey he had brought, as if we were discussing something trivial. "I know it hurts now," he said, looking directly at me, "but I hope that someday you'll understand. Ava and I are happy, and I want you to be part of that." My response was brief and direct. "Liam, what you did destroyed my life. I'll never understand how you could do this to me, and even less how you expect me to be happy for you." Liam was silent for a moment, as if he were processing my words. Then he stood up, leaving the bottle of whiskey on the table. "Well, I suppose it will take time, but in the end, we're brothers. We'll always be family." When he left, I stayed looking at the bottle on the table, feeling more alone than ever. The fact that he could stand there justifying himself and expecting everything to be okay made me realize how little I really meant to our relationship. That was the moment when I decided to completely cut off my family. If they had chosen Liam and Ava, then there was no space for me in that equation. What hurt me the most wasn't just losing Ava, but the complete indifference of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Deciding to cut off contact with my family wasn't something easy, but it became something necessary. Every interaction with them was like rubbing salt in an open wound. My mother kept calling me, leaving me messages about how family was the only thing that mattered and begging me to attend the wedding. My father, as always, didn't say much, but when he did, his words were a mixture of disapproval and contempt towards me for not knowing how to handle my emotions like a grown man. The last straw came one Sunday afternoon. I was in my apartment, trying to distract myself by watching television, when someone knocked on the door insistently. When I opened it, I was met with my mother and Ava. Yes, Ava, my ex-wife, was standing there next to my mother with an expression that oscillated between discomfort and guilt. "We know you're hurt, Oliver," my mother said while Ava lowered her gaze. "But we need you to talk to us. It's time to leave this behind." I closed the door without saying a word. I felt the rage and the pain bubbling inside me, but I wasn't going to explode in front of them. I stayed standing behind the door, listening to my mother knock again, while saying things like, "Liam and Ava need you, and grudges won't get you anywhere." They finally gave up, but not before leaving a letter under the door. I didn't read it immediately. Instead, I threw it directly into the trash. That visit was the last straw. I could no longer continue living in the same city as them, facing the constant possibility of running into them or of them appearing unannounced. I decided that it was time to leave. I began to look for options to relocate. My job had offices in other cities, and after talking to my boss, they offered me the possibility of transferring to Austin, Texas. It wasn't a place that I had ever considered before, but the idea of a new beginning in a completely different place gave me hope. No more constant memories, no more awkward encounters, just a new place where I could rebuild my life from scratch. While I was organizing the move, my thoughts kept revolving around Liam and Ava's wedding. Although I tried to ignore it, the news reached me anyway, whether through mutual friends or relatives who were trying to convince me to attend. The ceremony was planned to be held at my parents' house, in the large backyard where we had celebrated family parties all our life. That idea made my stomach churn. A week before my move, my cousin Emma, one of the few people in my family who still supported me, called me. She told me that she had decided not to attend the wedding and that many of the younger cousins were on the same side. According to her, the dynamic of favoritism in our family had been evident to everyone for years, and this situation only confirmed it. That call made me feel less alone. At least someone else understood how absurd and damaging this situation was. However, Emma also told me something that left me perplexed. Ava was pregnant. The news hit me like a train. For a moment, my mind tried to deny what I was hearing, but everything fit together. The rush for the wedding, my mother's constant justifications about moving forward, and the strange comments from some relatives about a new life. Ava was having a child with Liam. I didn't know how to react. On the one hand, I felt deeply relieved that she wasn't with me anymore when this happened. On the other hand, the idea that my ex-wife and my brother were building this perfect life while I struggled to stay afloat seemed like a cosmic cruelty. On the day of their wedding, I did my best not to think about it. I woke up early, went to the gym, and then spent the day packing my things for the move. But as the afternoon progressed, my mind kept returning to that event. I imagined the laughter, the toasts, the speeches full of lies about true love. I imagined my parents radiant with pride, celebrating Liam as they had always done, while I remained completely outside the narrative. I couldn't avoid going online. I knew that it was a mistake, but I needed to see. A quick search on social media confirmed what I feared. Photos of the ceremony began to appear. There they were, Ava and Liam smiling at the altar, while my mother cried with happiness in the front row. Everything seemed so perfect from the outside. In the comments, acquaintances continued congratulating them for their beautiful love story. But there was something that caught my attention. Several of my cousins, including Emma, had left scathing comments. Family was always the most important thing for Liam, even if he had to destroy it, said one. How inspiring to see someone betray their brother for a dream wedding, wrote another. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. At least I wasn't completely alone in my indignation. My move to Austin was a breath of fresh air. Arriving in a new place without the constant ghosts of my family or Ava allowed me to breathe for the first time in months. I got a small apartment in the center, began to explore the city, and focused on my work. Slowly, I began to feel that I could recover some emotional stability. However, my family wasn't willing to let me go so easily. Despite the fact that I had blocked my mother, my father, and Liam on all possible platforms, they began to send me emails. At first, I ignored them, but then one of my mother's emails caught my attention. The subject said, "The baby needs his uncle." I opened the email full of curiosity and frustration. My mother was begging me to consider being part of the life of Ava and Liam's son, saying that it was a new opportunity to heal as a family. That phrase left me breathless. Did they really think that a baby was going to fix the disaster that they had created? I took a deep breath and closed the email. I knew that I couldn't respond without saying something that I would later regret. Instead, I told myself that I had made the right decision in cutting ties. If they were so determined to live in their world of fantasy, let them do it without me. Adapting to my new life in Austin was a slow process, but over time I began to find something similar to peace. I got a local therapist, and week after week, I worked to dissect the emotional chaos that my family and Ava had left behind. Although I still felt the sting of betrayal, little by little I learned to focus on the present and to stop fueling the cycle of anger and resentment. Despite my physical and emotional distance, my family seemed determined to continue meddling in my life. The emails from my mother continued to arrive, although I ignored most of them. My cousins occasionally informed me of what was happening with Liam and Ava, even though I didn't ask them to. What I heard only reaffirmed my decision to stay away. It turns out that the fairy tale that Liam and Ava were building wasn't as perfect as they wanted it to seem. According to Emma, the problems began shortly after the wedding. Ava, apparently, was dealing with a lot of stress over the mixed reaction from the family. Some of our relatives had cut ties with them, and others attended the wedding only to maintain appearances. The tension grew even more when the business that Liam was trying to start financed of course by my parents, failed miserably. According to what they told me, the relationship between them began to show cracks quickly. I would like to say that hearing about their problems brought me some kind of satisfaction, but in reality, it left me feeling empty. Their suffering couldn't undo the damage that they had done. It couldn't give me back the years of my life that they had destroyed. It only reaffirmed that I had made the right decision in cutting off contact with them. A few months after my move, while I was beginning to feel that I was rebuilding a stable life, something happened that shook me deeply. I received a call from an unknown number. I usually don't answer numbers that I don't recognize, but something impelled me to do it. It was Ava. My first reaction was to hang up, but before I could do it, she began to cry. Her voice was broken, and she spoke so fast that I could barely understand her. "I'm so sorry, Oliver. I don't know why I'm calling you, but I'm lost. I don't know what to do." I was completely disconcerted. After months of silence, why was she calling me now? I couldn't understand her audacity in seeking comfort in me, the person whom she had hurt most deeply. My first impulse was to scream at her, to release all the accumulated resentment that I still held, but something in her tone made me stop. She sounded so hopeless, as if she were on the verge of a collapse. I took a deep breath and told her coldly, "I don't know what you expect from me, Ava. You and Liam made your decisions. I have nothing to offer you." She sobbed even louder, and through tears, she began to talk about her problems with Liam. According to her, their relationship had deteriorated rapidly. Liam had begun to lose interest in the baby even before he was born, and now that the child was barely a few months old, he spent most of his time away from home. Apparently, Liam had grown tired of playing family and was looking for ways to regain his freedom. "I don't know who else to turn to," she said finally. "I know that I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to talk to someone who knew me, who I once mattered to." That last phrase hit me like a punch in the stomach. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a much larger part was full of disbelief and rage. She had destroyed my life. She had chosen Liam over me. And now that things weren't turning out as she expected, she had the gall to ask me for support? "Ava, I think you need to seek professional help, not me." My tone was dry, but I knew it was the right thing to say. I had thought about what I would say if she ever came looking for me to apologize, but at that moment, the only thing I wanted was to move on. The weeks following that call were a whirlwind of emotions. I realized that although I had cut ties with my family and Ava, I still carried the weight of their betrayal with me. I had advanced in many aspects, but I was still a prisoner of my own rage and sadness. Over time, I learned to let go of that weight, not because I felt that they deserved my forgiveness, but because I needed it to heal. My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's to free yourself from what ties you to the pain. One day, while walking through downtown Austin, I found myself looking at the families that were passing by, the couples laughing together, the people living their lives without the baggage that I carried. At that moment, I realized something. I couldn't control what Liam, Ava, or my family had done, but I could control how I responded to it. I didn't want to be defined by their betrayal anymore. Now, a year later, I am still in Austin. I have built a new life for myself. I have made new friends. I have found hobbies that I enjoy. For the first time in a long time, I am considering dating again. My family continues to try to contact me occasionally, but I have made it clear that I have no interest in reopening those wounds. Sometimes, I still think about everything that happened. There are nights when the memories return and sadness creeps in, but they are less frequent now. Story 4. My mom and sister tried to reconcile me with my ex for years, but I married another and now have a child. When I was 17, I started dating my older brother's best friend. It was something that I never imagined would happen, but it did. He was that kind of guy that all adults adored, respectful, hardworking, and always with a smile on his face. I had known him since I was little because he spent a lot of time at our house, but I had always seen him as my brother's friend, nothing more. However, everything changed when I started my senior year of high school. He began to look for me more often, to offer to take me home after classes, and to stay longer at family gatherings, even when my brother wasn't there. At first, our relationship was a secret. We knew that my brother could be very overprotective and that he probably wouldn't take it well, but we couldn't help it. We were young, we were in love, and everything seemed to fit together in an almost magical way. It wasn't long before my brother found out. One afternoon, While he was arriving home unexpectedly early, he found us together in the living room watching a movie. I thought he was going to explode with fury, but he just sighed deeply and said, "If you make her cry, you're going to have to answer to me." After that, although with certain initial tensions, he accepted our relationship. The following 2 years were intense. He was part of everything in my life: family dinners, weekend trips, even boring Sunday gatherings at my grandparents' house. My mom adored him. For her, he was the ideal son-in-law, kind, reliable, and always willing to help in anything we needed. My sister, on the other hand, saw him almost as an older brother. More than that, she was obsessed with the idea that we were the perfect couple. She constantly told me things like, "If you don't marry him, you'll never find someone better," or "You guys are made for each other." But the truth is that, although I loved him, I never felt that our relationship was as ideal as others saw it. He was wonderful, but I had aspirations that went beyond staying in our small town, getting married, and starting a family so young. When I was 19, just after graduating, he did something that I didn't expect. He proposed marriage to me. It was a summer afternoon. We were at the lake where we used to go to escape the heat, and suddenly he pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside, there was a simple but beautiful ring. He looked me in the eyes and with a trembling voice said, "You're the best thing that has ever happened to me. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." My heart stopped, not because I didn't love him, but because I knew in my heart that I wasn't ready for something like that. I was barely beginning to understand who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. Getting married at that age would mean giving up so many things: traveling, studying, experiencing the world. So, with tears in my eyes, I said, "I can't. I love you, but I'm not ready for this." He was shattered, although he tried to hide it. It wasn't long before things between us began to deteriorate. He became more distant, and I knew that, although we were still together, he had never gotten over my rejection. Finally, we decided to end it. It was one of the most difficult decisions I have ever made, but I knew that it was the right thing for both of us. I thought that that would be the last time I would have to deal with that situation, but I was completely wrong. My mom and my sister couldn't accept that our relationship had ended. For them, we were the perfect example of a happy couple, and my decision not to marry him was seen as a selfish and misguided act. My mom constantly repeated to me, "You'll never find someone like him. A man like that isn't found every day." My sister, on the other hand, was determined to reunite us in any way possible. At first, I tried to ignore their comments. I thought that, over time, they would accept that things had changed and that I needed to move on with my life. But it was quite the opposite. It seemed that the more I tried to distance them from the topic, the more they clung to the idea that I should reconcile with him. My mom began to invite him to all the family gatherings, even when I wasn't comfortable with his presence. My sister made constant comments about how good we looked together and tried to force casual encounters between us. Once, during a family dinner, my sister had the audacity to arrange the seats so that he would be next to me throughout the entire night. They made comments like, "You guys still look like a match made in heaven," and "You should try again." I felt that I was losing control of my life. At 21 years old, I moved to another city to study at the university, hoping that the distance would finally give me some peace. For a while it worked, but every time I came home to visit my family, it was as if nothing had changed. My mom kept talking to me about him as if we were still a couple. My sister asked me things like, "Don't you miss him? Don't you think you're letting something special slip away?" The breaking point came during the Christmas holidays that year. My mom organized a big dinner at home, as was customary, and begged me to attend. I didn't want to go, but in the end I gave in. When I arrived, he was there, sitting comfortably in the living room as if we had never broken up. My sister had organized everything so that we would sit at the table together during dinner. The suggestive comments continued, and finally I couldn't take it anymore. After dinner, I called my mom and my sister aside and told them very clearly, "I don't want to talk about him again. I don't want you to invite him to any more family gatherings. Our relationship ended, and that's how it's going to stay." Both of them were stunned. My mom began to cry, saying that I was being cruel, and my sister accused me of being selfish. Setting clear limits after that Christmas dinner was a momentary relief, but it also marked the beginning of a series of tensions with my family. My mom stopped talking to me for several weeks, saying that they needed to reflect on my attitude. My sister, on the other hand, became even more insistent. She sent me messages almost daily, arguing that I wasn't thinking clearly, that I was wasting a unique opportunity, and that I should reconsider. Of course, I ignored all her attempts to persuade me. I had already made a decision, and I wasn't going to back down. During that time, I tried to focus on my life away from home. I had managed to move to a bigger city to study, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I had some control over my destiny. I made new friends, I joined study groups, and I began to explore what it meant to be independent. Finally, I was living something that seemed to be mine, away from the expectations and the judgments of my family. However, the calm never lasted long. Every time I returned home to visit my parents, the situation became unsustainable. My mom insisted that my ex stop by to say hello because, according to her, he was still like family. My sister took advantage of any opportunity to bring him into the conversation, talking about how well he was doing or how he still missed me. It was as if everything revolved around him, even when he wasn't present. I remember once, during a weekend visit, when my sister literally set a trap for me. She asked me to accompany her to pick something up at a coffee shop in the center, and because I wanted to avoid more conflicts, I accepted. Upon arriving, I came face to face with my ex, who was sitting at a table with 2 coffees already served. My sister smiled as if she had done something wonderful and said, "I thought it would be good for you to talk." I was about to leave at that very moment, but he asked me to stay, claiming that he only wanted to close cycles. It was an uncomfortable, frankly useless conversation. He still believed that we could get back together, while I only wanted him to stop pursuing me, literally or symbolically. After that episode, I decided to reduce my visits home to the minimum. I knew that my mom and my sister had good intentions, at least from their perspective, but their constant attempts to control me were affecting my mental peace. My brother, although he didn't say it openly, seemed to understand my position. He always greeted me with a more neutral attitude and even began to distance himself a little from my ex. However, the influence of my mom and my sister was so strong that, on occasions, even he felt trapped in the drama. The situation reached another level when I met someone new during a university exchange program abroad. He was from another university, but we had coincided in an intensive course. From the beginning, there was something special between us. It wasn't like those passionate romances that you see in the movies, but there was a genuine connection, a tranquility that I hadn't felt before. We spent hours talking about our goals, our dreams, and our families. It was refreshing to be with someone who had no connection to my past. When I returned from the exchange, we stayed in contact and finally began dating. My new relationship gave me a completely different perspective on what I wanted in a partner and in my life. He was considerate, respectful, and most importantly, he didn't try to impose his wishes on me. After a year of dating, he proposed marriage to me, and this time I said yes without hesitation. I knew that I was ready to take that step with someone who really understood me and supported me. When I told my family about my engagement, the reactions were varied. My dad and my brother seemed genuinely happy for me. My mom, however, was silent for a moment before saying, "Are you sure about this? Isn't it too soon?" My sister, as expected, was much more direct. "You're making another mistake. He's not the one for you." It was frustrating, but I was already used to my family questioning every important decision I made. What really infuriated me was that, despite having made it clear that my ex was no longer part of my life, my sister continued meddling where she wasn't called. During the wedding preparations, I found out that she had been in contact with my ex, telling him details about my relationship and even inviting him to the ceremony. When I confronted my sister, she acted as if she were doing the right thing. "He deserves to know what's happening," she told me. "Besides, what's wrong with me wanting to wish you the best?" Finally, I had to take drastic measures. I called my ex directly and made it very clear that he wasn't welcome at my wedding, nor in any aspect of my life. I also asked my family to respect my decision, although I knew that not everyone would. My sister insisted that I was being cruel, but for me it was a matter of setting boundaries and protecting my happiness. On the day of the wedding, despite my sister's attempts to sabotage it, it was perfect. Being surrounded by people who really supported me was a reminder of how far I had come. However, it wasn't long before the drama came knocking on my door again. My mom and my sister couldn't accept that I had moved on. They began to insist that I should give my ex another chance, even after being married. According to them, I still had time to fix things before it was too late. My mom and my sister's attempts to reconnect me with my ex intensified after my wedding. It was as if, instead of accepting that I had already begun a new chapter in my life, they were determined to tear out that page and return to the past. At first, their actions were more subtle, almost passive-aggressive. Comments at family gatherings, awkward questions about my marriage, and of course, mentioning my ex whenever they could. But over time, things became much more invasive. The first sign that this wasn't going to stop was during my first wedding anniversary. My husband and I had planned a quiet weekend in a cabin near the mountains. I was excited to disconnect from everything and spend quality time with him. However, a day before leaving, I received an unexpected package at our house. It was a gift wrapped with elegant paper, and I thought that it might be something from my family or from a close friend. When I opened it, I found a photo album full of memories of my relationship with my ex. There were photos of us on trips, at family gatherings, and even movie tickets that we had saved as souvenirs. Inside the album, there was a note that said, "There's still time to rectify things. Think about what really makes you happy." My heart sank. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from my sister. I felt a mixture of rage, sadness, and frustration. How could she continue ignoring my boundaries in that way? I showed the album to my husband, who, although he had always been patient with my family, this time was visibly upset. "This isn't normal," he told me. "You have to talk to them and make it clear that this can't continue." That same night, I called my sister. I confronted her directly, asking her how she could do something like that, knowing that I was happily married. Her response was a classic of her. "I just wanted you to remember how good you had together. I still think you're with the wrong person." I hung up the phone without saying anything more. I knew that I wasn't going to change her opinion, and honestly, I was exhausted from trying to explain something to her that she simply didn't want to understand. The package was just the beginning. In the following weeks, stranger things began to happen. My ex began to appear in places where I had never seen him before. The supermarket that I used to go to, the park where we walked our dog, even near the gym that my husband and I went to together. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but then I discovered that my sister had been giving him details about my routines and schedules. I found out about this because a close friend told me that she had heard him talking about me at a social event, mentioning things that only someone from my inner circle could know. Finally, I decided that it was enough. I called my mom and my sister for a serious conversation. I explained to them that their actions were crossing a line and that I was no longer willing to tolerate it. My mom, as always, tried to minimize the problem. "We just want what's best for you," she said. "He's still a good person, and your sister is just trying to help." My sister, on the other hand, was much more direct. "You're making a mistake, and if you don't see it now, you eventually will." It was at that moment that I decided to put a more significant distance between us. I told them that I didn't want to see them or talk to them until they could respect my life and my decisions. After that conversation, I cut off almost all contact with my mom and my sister. My dad and my brother, although they didn't completely agree with my decision, respected it. My dad even confessed to me that he understood why I needed that space. "Your mother has a habit of not letting things go," he said. "Maybe this will teach her that there are limits." During the following months, things improved noticeably. My husband and I enjoyed our life together without constant interruptions from my family, and I felt that I could finally breathe. But as usually happens, the peace didn't last forever. Everything exploded again when I got pregnant. The pregnancy was wonderful news for us. We had been trying for a while, and finally we had something that we had both desired so much. We decided to wait a few weeks before telling our families, just to make sure that everything was okay. When we finally announced it, the reaction was mostly positive. My dad was thrilled, my brother and his wife sent us gifts, and my in-laws were delighted. But as expected, my mom and my sister reacted in a completely different way. Instead of congratulating me, my sister immediately brought up my ex. "Did he find out yet?" she asked with an almost malicious smile. "You should tell him. Maybe this will inspire him to fight for you again." My mom, although she wasn't so direct, hinted at something similar. "He always wanted to start a family with you," she said almost wistfully. It was then that I realized that for them, even my pregnancy was a reason to try to reconnect me with someone who was no longer part of my life. The last straw came a few weeks later when my sister organized a surprise meeting at my mom's house. She told me that it would be something small, just to celebrate the pregnancy. I hesitated to go, but my husband encouraged me, saying that maybe they were trying to make amends. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed was my ex's car parked in front of the house. I felt a knot in my stomach. We entered, and there he was, sitting on the sofa next to his mother. My mom and my sister looked at us as if they were about to announce something grandiose. "We thought it was time to talk like adults," my sister said. I didn't know how to respond. I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My husband, who was generally quiet, couldn't contain himself. "This is completely inappropriate," he said. He took my hand, and we left the house without saying anything more. After that surprise meeting, everything changed forever. My husband and I were furious, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that there was no turning back with my mom and my sister. We were dealing with something much more serious, a pregnancy, the beginning of our family. There was no room to tolerate toxic, manipulative, or disrespectful behaviors. That night, while we were driving home, I couldn't stop crying. I felt a mixture of sadness, anger, and exhaustion. My husband tried to console me as best he could, but even he was clearly frustrated. "I don't understand how they can be so selfish," he said while driving. "It's like they don't care about your happiness or our baby." The next day, I decided to take more serious measures. I talked to my dad and my brother to explain what had happened. My brother, who had always tried to maintain peace among everyone, finally exploded. "This is too much," he said. "I'm going to talk to them. It's not fair that you have to go through this." My dad, although calmer, agreed that something had to change. He promised me that he would talk to my mom to make it clear that her actions were affecting our family relationship. However, things didn't turn out as I expected. When my dad tried to reason with my mom, she became defensive, as always. "We're just trying to help her," she said. "She doesn't understand what she's leaving behind." My dad reminded her that I was happily married and that I had the right to make my own decisions, but that didn't seem to matter to her. Meanwhile, my brother had a similar conversation with my sister, who simply laughed and said, "Someday she'll thank me for it." I decided to cut off contact completely. I blocked their numbers, stopped answering emails and messages, and avoided any family events where I knew that they would be present. My brother and my dad respected my decision, but at the same time, they tried to act as mediators, hoping that eventually I could reconcile. My mom even tried to involve other relatives, seeking support from aunts and cousins to convince me that I was exaggerating. Some tried to remain neutral, but others accused me of being too harsh. It was painful, but I knew that I was doing the right thing. My husband, always my biggest supporter, was completely in agreement. "They crossed a line," he told me. "This is our moment. You can't allow them to ruin it." Things calmed down for a while, or at least that's how it seemed. I focused on my pregnancy and on preparing our home for the arrival of the baby. It was an exciting time, full of changes and expectations. But as usually happens, my mom and my sister didn't give up so easily. Their next move was something that I never would have imagined. One day, I received an unexpected call from an old family friend. She told me that my mom had been organizing a kind of intervention for me. According to her, my mom and my sister were convinced that my marriage was a mistake and that I still had time to correct it. She explained that they had been gathering people close to me, including some relatives and friends, to persuade me to return with my ex. "They're taking this too far," she warned me. "I just wanted you to know." That call left me stunned. How could they go to those extremes? Didn't they understand the damage they were causing? I decided not to sit idly by. My husband and I hired a lawyer to protect ourselves legally if the situation escalated. We also began to document everything: messages, emails, even the conversations that other relatives had reported to us. We wanted to be prepared for anything. Shortly after, my dad called me to warn me that my mom and my sister were planning to appear at our house to talk. I didn't know exactly what they wanted, but the simple act of imagining myself facing them in my own space filled me with anxiety. We decided to take immediate measures. We changed the locks, installed security cameras, and asked our neighbors to be vigilant. We even considered moving, but with the baby on the way, it wasn't a practical option at that moment. On the day that they appeared, I wasn't alone. My husband had decided to stay home that day, and my brother also came to support me. When my mom and my sister knocked on the door, my husband went out to talk to them. "You're not welcome here," he told them firmly. My sister tried to push the door, screaming that she only wanted to talk, but my brother intervened. "This has to stop," he told them. "She doesn't want to see you, and you have to respect that." They finally left, but not without a great scandal at the door. My mom cried, saying that I was a bad daughter, and my sister screamed that I was ruining the family. It was a painful spectacle to witness, but at the same time, it made me feel more secure in my decision to stand firm. That incident was the breaking point for my dad. He decided to separate temporarily from my mom, moving in with my brother to have some peace. He told me that he couldn't continue supporting her behavior, especially now that I was pregnant and needed a positive environment. His decision surprised me, but it also gave me hope that at least some things were changing for the better. Meanwhile, I continued focusing on my health and on preparing to be a mom. My husband and I were a solid team, and every day that passed, I felt more grateful for having him by my side. Despite all the chaos that my mom and my sister had caused, I knew that our family would be different, based on respect, love, and above all, clear limits. However, the drama was far from over. My sister would not take long to find a new way to get involved, this time using other members of the family to try to get her way. With each attempt of my mom and my sister to meddle in my life, it seemed that the situation only escalated. Although I had taken firm measures to limit contact, they found ways to make their presence felt in my day-to-day, either through third parties or, in the case of my sister, creating small support networks among some relatives to try to justify themselves. During the final months of my pregnancy, their tactics intensified, causing even some of my cousins to call me to give me advice or ask me to reconsider my decisions. One of the most absurd episodes occurred during the baby shower that my in-laws organized. It was a beautiful event full of love. Everyone was happy for us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I could enjoy something without worrying. But as expected, the peace didn't last long. My sister, who had not been invited for obvious reasons, managed to find out the place and appeared without prior notice. When I saw her arriving, dressed as if she were the host of the event, I felt a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "I just want to be here to support you," she said, holding a gift wrapped with an exaggeratedly large bow. My husband, who was by my side, took my hand and whispered, "Do you want me to take her out?" But before we could act, my sister was already surrounded by some relatives who didn't know about the conflict and began to ask her questions, thinking that everything was fine. What followed was a spectacle that in retrospect seemed taken from a comedy movie. My sister began to talk about my ex in the middle of the gathering, saying things like he always wanted to have children with her, and this must be so difficult for him. My mother-in-law, a quiet but strong-willed woman, didn't take long to intervene. "This is a day to celebrate this family," she said directly. "If you can't respect that, I suggest you leave." My sister, visibly upset, left the gift on the table and left, muttering something about how I was driving the family away. It was humiliating, but at the same time, I felt an enormous relief to see that I wasn't alone in this. After the baby shower, I decided that it was time to take more definitive measures. My husband and I talked to our lawyer to draft a formal letter addressed to my mom and my sister, demanding that they cease any attempt to contact me directly or indirectly. The letter specified that if they continued, we would have no choice but to seek a restraining order. It was a difficult decision, especially because it implied completely cutting off any possibility of reconciliation at that moment. But I knew that it was necessary to protect my health and that of my baby. When my mom received the letter, she called me immediately, but I didn't answer. Instead, she left a voicemail full of tears and pleas, saying that she only wanted what was best for me and that she was willing to do anything to fix things. My sister, on the other hand, was much less subtle. She posted a long message on social media, accusing me of being ungrateful and selfish, and saying that my husband was manipulating me to distance me from my family. Fortunately, most of the people who read that publication knew the truth and didn't give it credit. Finally, the most important day of our lives arrived, the birth of our son. It was a magical moment that marked a before and after for me. Holding my baby for the first time filled me with a sense of peace and purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. My husband, who had been by my side every step of the way, cried while caressing the small hand of our son. In that instant, I knew that I had made all the right decisions, however difficult they were. After the birth, my mom and my sister tried to reach out again, this time through relatives who had been more neutral in the conflict. My mom even sent a gift to the hospital, a set of baby clothes with a card that said, "I hope that someday we can be together as a family again." I decided to return the gift unopened, making it clear that I wasn't ready to resume contact. My sister, true to her style, attempted a more dramatic approach. In a last attempt to call attention, she began to spread rumors that my husband was controlling my life and that I wasn't happy in my marriage. These accusations reached the ears of my brother, who finally lost patience with her. "If you really want to save something of this family," he told her, "you need to leave her alone." According to what he later told me, my sister didn't respond, but she seemed to finally understand that she had crossed a line from which she couldn't return. Despite everything, life went on. My husband and I adapted to life as new parents, surrounded by people who truly supported us. My dad, who had made the de facto separation from my mom, began to visit us regularly and became a loving and present grandfather. My brother also strengthened his relationship with us, making an effort to be closer and support our decisions. Story 5. My family mocked my career for years, but when I bought the house they rented for their reunion, I gave them 30 days to move out, and everything changed forever. I'm Liam. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove to my family that I'm not a failure. Spoiler alert, they weren't impressed. To put you in context, I grew up in Kansas City in a family that always seemed to value appearances more than substance. My parents, Alexander and Elizabeth, were those who organized extravagant dinners and constantly competed with their friends about who was more successful. But they weren't really rich. They simply accumulated debt with credit cards to buy designer furniture, while my brother Teo and I wore secondhand clothes. Teo, by the way, is the perfect son. He's 28 years old now, but since we were little, it was clear that he was the favorite. While I was mowing lawns at 14 to buy my first phone, Teo received a new PlayStation every Christmas. I don't blame him. He was a good kid, but as we grew up, the favoritism became blatant. Teo went to an expensive private school, while I stayed in the public one. My dad even took out a second mortgage to pay Teo's tuition, while I was told that I should learn the value of effort when I asked for help to pay for college. So there I was, going to a community college and working 3 jobs to pay for it. It wasn't glamorous, but I managed it. I got into the world of programming, which at that time my parents dismissed as playing with computers. When I told them that I wanted to start a technology consulting business, they laughed, literally laughed. My mom said, "Maybe someday you'll get a real job." Let's fast forward a few years. Against all odds, and with many nights of coffee and Red Bull, my little hobby became a real business. At 28, I was already earning 6 figures a year. I had a solid team and lived comfortably in Denver. Did my parents care? Not a bit. Teo, on the other hand, had just gotten a job in finance in New York, thanks to Dad's contacts, and suddenly every family gathering was an altar dedicated to his brilliant career. My achievements, on the other hand, were reduced to a casual comment, like, "How's your little business going, Liam?" The straw that broke the camel's back came 5 years ago. My parents announced that they would sell the family home to move to something more modern. It didn't bother me so much the house itself. I didn't live there anymore, but how they did it. They didn't tell me until they had already signed the papers. To make matters worse, they threw away all my childhood belongings, photos, memories, even the desk that I had built with my grandfather. I found out because a neighbor sent me a photo of the pile of garbage. After that, I cut off contact for a while. Teo tried to mediate, but it was clear that my parents didn't think that they had done anything wrong. During the following years, I focused on my business and on my life, occasionally contacting Teo, who would fill me in on the latest about my parents, their vacations, their complaints that I never called them, the usual. Then, 2 months ago, Teo called me out of the blue. "Liam," he began with an uncomfortable tone. "Hey, we're going to have a family reunion. Mom and Dad really want you to come." I was about to hang up, the audacity of inviting me after years of silence. But then he added something that caught my attention. "It will be at the old house. They're renting it for the weekend." Wait, what? I knew that they had sold the house, but not that they now rented it. It turns out that their modern dream had been more expensive than they thought, and they couldn't afford it. They had been discreetly renting the old house from the new owner for almost a year, and that's when a plan began to form. You see, I had been looking for properties to invest in Kansas City for a while, and this seemed like a sign. I asked Teo for the owner's contact with the excuse of nostalgia, and in less than 2 weeks, I closed the deal. The house was mine, and of course I was going to attend the family reunion. The day of the family reunion arrived. I arrived early, parking a block away from the house. I wanted to give myself a moment to prepare before entering the circus that I knew awaited me. As I walked down the entrance, memories hit me like an avalanche. Summer nights playing basketball in the street, silly fights with Teo in the backyard, the happy moments that now seemed part of another life. When I crossed the door, I stopped for a moment to take it all in. They had decorated the house for the event, and I couldn't deny that it looked quite good. Flowers everywhere, soft music in the background, and a buffet worthy of a wedding. My parents, in their eternal obsession with appearances, had clearly pulled out all the stops. It wasn't long before Teo saw me from the other side of the room. His face lit up, and he crossed the place quickly to give me one of those awkward hugs that he always tried to make seem natural. "Liam, it's so good that you came, brother," he said, smiling from ear to ear. "Well, I thought it was worth coming," I responded with a forced smile. Before we could continue talking, my mother appeared. Elizabeth, always impeccable, wore an elegant dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked me up and down, clearly evaluating my clothes, some jeans, and a casual shirt. "Liam," she said with that sweet but judgmental tone that she had perfected, "you look comfortable. I'm glad you could come. We haven't seen you in a long time." "Yes, well, I've been busy," I said, trying to maintain neutrality. "Of course," she responded, drawing a smile that was more condescending than warm. "Teo told me that your business is still going strong. That's good. Teo, by the way, just got a promotion in New York. We're so proud of him." Teo looked away, clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. I simply nodded. "Congratulations, Teo," I said, ignoring the sting. A few minutes later, my father joined the conversation. Alexander, glass in hand, greeted me with his typical pat on the back, as if we were old friends. "Liam's son, it's so good to see you. How wonderful to have the whole family together under this roof again. This house will always be a symbol of what we've built, don't you think?" I looked at him, feeling a mixture of disbelief and rage. A symbol of what we've built? This was the man who had sold the house without telling me, who had thrown my memories away like they were garbage. But I decided to remain silent for now. The afternoon passed between small conversations and a constant parade of relatives that I barely remembered, all wanting to catch up as if time hadn't passed. My parents, meanwhile, strolled through the room like perfect hosts, making sure that everyone knew how successful Teo was. My presence, as always, was a footnote. After dinner, my father stood up to give a small speech. With his glass raised, he smiled and said, "We're so grateful to have you all here today. This house has a special place in our hearts. It's not just a building. It's a symbol of everything we've worked for this family." The words burned inside me, but I stayed in my place, waiting. Then he added, "Although technically it's not ours anymore, we've been fortunate to continue enjoying it." I knew that it was my moment. I stood up slowly, gently tapping my glass with a spoon to call attention. All eyes turned towards me, including my mother's, who seemed annoyed by the interruption. "Excuse me," I began with a calm smile. "I just wanted to take advantage of this moment to make an announcement." There was a murmur of curiosity as I let the silence linger a little. Then I took out the keys from my pocket and held them up high. "I want to thank you for inviting me today. It's wonderful to see this house full of life again. Although I have to say, it's not exactly a rental anymore." My words seemed to float in the air as everyone processed what I had just said. My mother frowned, clearly confused. "What are you saying, Liam?" "I'm saying that I bought the house," I responded with the same calm. "It's mine now." The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, my father let out a nervous laugh. "This is a joke, right?" "Not at all," I said with a smile. "The previous owner wanted to sell, and I thought that it would be a good time to invest. Besides, it was an opportunity to recover something from my childhood." My mother stood up, clearly agitated. "That can't be. We have a contract. We're renting this house." "That's true," I nodded, taking a document from my pocket. "A month-to-month contract, which means that I can terminate it with 30 days' notice, and well, today marks exactly those 30 days. My mother's expression went from surprise to panic, and then to rage. "You can't do this, Liam," she said with a trembling voice. "This is our home. This is cruel." I didn't respond, keeping my gaze fixed on her. "This was your home. Now it's mine." My father, red with anger, slammed the table with his fist. "This is ridiculous. This is for revenge, isn't it? After all that we've done for you, this is how you pay us back. I couldn't help but laugh. All that you've done for me, like when you sold this house without telling me, when you threw my things away, or maybe when you treated me like I was invisible for years. Yes, Dad, all that prepared me very well for this moment. Teo tried to intervene, as always. Liam, please, don't do this. Let's talk. No, Teo, I said, turning to him. I've made a decision. My mother began to hyperventilate while my father muttered legal threats that I knew he couldn't fulfill. I approached the table, left the eviction notice in front of them, and with a calm smile, said, "You have 30 days to find another place. Good luck." Without waiting for a response, I turned around and left the house. I closed the door behind me, feeling a strange mixture of relief and guilt. As I walked down the entrance, the cold afternoon wind hit my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was on what had just happened, on how the apparent calm of the reunion had exploded in a matter of seconds. I hadn't reached my car when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. It was Teo. "Liam, wait," he said, reaching me and grabbing my jacket. His tone was full of frustration and concern. "What the hell was that? Did you really have to do it like that?" I stopped and looked at him, tired. "Teo, this isn't something that I decided overnight. They've been belittling me, ignoring me, making fun of me for years. Why would I have to continue allowing them to do that?" "But they're our parents," Teo responded as if it were an obvious argument. "No, Teo," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "They're your parents. I've been little more than an emotional tenant in this family, someone who was only there to fill space while they bet everything on you. And now, for the first time, I'm in control. Why should I give that up?" Teo frowned and ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit that he had always had. "This isn't helping anyone, Liam. You're just pushing them further away. Is that what you want?" I didn't admit it, sighing. "I don't want to hurt them, but I don't want to continue being the target of their contempt. If this is what it takes for them to understand that they can't keep treating me the way they have, then yes, I'll do it." Teo seemed to process my words for a moment before nodding slowly. "Okay," he said finally. "I'm not saying that you have to forgive them, but could you at least think about it? Not for them, for you." "I'll think about it," I responded, although at that moment I wasn't sure if it was true. During the following days, the news of the eviction spread among the relatives like wildfire. My phone didn't stop ringing with messages and calls, most of which I ignored. Some were from distant cousins that I barely knew, trying to understand what had happened. Others, more aggressive, were from my parents. "Liam, how could you do this to us? This is cruel. This house means the world to us. Please, reconsider. My father, you're an ungrateful child. All that we've done for you, and this is how you pay us back? This won't stand." Even Teo sent messages every now and then, trying to keep the peace. Although his tone was more conciliatory, I couldn't help but feel that he was asking too much of me. But the truth was that I wasn't reconsidering anything. I had spent my whole life accommodating myself so that others felt comfortable, and it was time to prioritize myself. A few weeks later, things took an unexpected turn. While reviewing some documents in my office, I received a call from my lawyer. "Liam," he said with a serious tone, "I just wanted to inform you that your parents have decided not to dispute the eviction notice. They're going to move out before the deadline." I closed my eyes and let out a sigh that I didn't even know I had been holding in. "Really?" I confirmed. "Yes," he answered. "It seems that they understood that they didn't have many legal options. From what I know, they're already looking for a new place." "Thank you for letting me know," I said, hanging up shortly after. Despite the satisfaction I felt knowing that the process was advancing without more conflicts, there was also a sense of emptiness. I had won, yes, but it didn't feel like a victory. My parents were on their way, dealing with the result of years of decisions and toxic family dynamics. And although I knew that it wasn't my fault, I couldn't help but wonder if there was another way to resolve this. On the day that they moved out, I went to the house, not to confront them, but to make sure that everything was in order. When I arrived, a moving truck was at the entrance, and my parents and Teo were finishing loading the last boxes. My mom was standing next to the door, looking at the house as if she were losing something more than bricks and cement. When she saw me, her face went from surprise to pain in a second. My father, on the other hand, ignored me completely and continued working in silence. Teo was the first to approach. "They're almost ready," he said, trying to force a smile. I thought you wouldn't come. I didn't come for them. I responded sincerely. I came for the house. Teo sighed and shook his head, but he didn't say anything more. Finally, my mom approached. Does this make you happy, Liam? She asked, her voice trembling. Seeing your family like this? Do you really think this was necessary? It's not about being happy, Mom, I responded, looking her in the eyes. It's about respect, and for years, you haven't given it to me. If this is what it takes for you to understand how I felt, then yes, I think it was necessary. She didn't respond. She just turned around, her shoulders drooping from the weight of the words. When they finally left, I stayed standing at the entrance, watching as the moving truck disappeared into the distance. The house was empty, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that it was mine. That night, sitting on the living room floor with a beer in my hand, I thought about everything that had happened, about how far I had come since those days when I felt invisible in my own family. I had fought to get here, and although the road had been painful, I knew that I had done the right thing. However, while I was looking at the empty walls, a question kept circling in my mind. What comes next? The days that followed my parents' move were a mixture of calm and inner chaos. The house was in complete silence, which gave me space to think, but also left too much room for reflection. Sitting in the empty living room, with the light of the sunset filtering through the windows, I realized that the victory didn't feel as sweet as I had imagined. The house needed a lot of work. There were worn walls, stained carpets, and a general feeling of abandonment that I couldn't ignore. I decided that the first thing I had to do was transform the space, convert it into something that really reflected my new stage. I hired a remodeling team, chose colors to paint the walls, and little by little, I began to repair what time and indifference had worn down. During that process, I discovered things that I didn't expect. While dismantling a closet in the room that was once mine, I found an old notebook that I didn't remember having kept. It was full of drawings and small writings from when I was a child. One page caught my attention, a drawing of the house with a title at the top that said, "When I grow up, this will be my house forever." I stayed looking at that phrase for several minutes. There was something so innocent and honest in those words that it hit me like a brick. Perhaps, despite all the rage and the resentment, there was still something in me that desired that connection, that sense of belonging that I had dreamed of as a child. But now, instead of being surrounded by my family, I was alone. Shortly after, Teo came to visit me. He had been sending me messages almost daily since my parents moved out, but this time he wanted to talk in person. He arrived with a bottle of wine under his arm and that cautious expression that he always had when he tried to mediate. "How's the house going?" he asked while walking through the living room, observing the changes. "It's going well," I responded. "There's still a lot to do, but it's starting to feel like a place of my own." Teo nodded, but he didn't seem completely comfortable. After a few minutes of small talk, he finally blurted out what he had in mind. "Mom is devastated," he said, lowering his voice as if he feared that someone else was listening. "She doesn't stop talking about how everything went wrong. She says that she doesn't know how to fix things with you." I leaned on the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. "Teo, she had years to try to fix it. Now that they're finally facing the consequences, they expect me to be the one to take the first step? It's not fair. I'm not saying that you have to fix everything immediately," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'm just saying that, I don't know, maybe you could talk to them. Not for them, for you." "For me?" I repeated in disbelief. Teo nodded. "Look, I know that Mom and Dad did horrible things. I'm not going to excuse them, but carrying all that resentment isn't helping you. Maybe this is your opportunity to close the chapter." I looked at him for a long moment without knowing what to respond. There was something in his words that made sense, although I didn't want to admit it. Talking to them didn't mean that everything would be okay, but perhaps it could offer me some peace. That same night, while reviewing some emails, I saw a new message from my mom. She had been sending me emails since they moved out, but I almost never read them. This time, something made me open it. Subject: "Please listen to me, Liam. I know that you have no reason to read this, but I hope that you do. Not a day goes by that I don't think about how we got to this point. I don't want to justify myself, but I want you to know that although I may not always have shown it, I have always cared about you. When we sold the house, I thought that it was the best thing for the family. I didn't think about what it meant to you, and I deeply regret it. For years, I have let my wrong priorities get in the way between us, and that's something that I'll have to carry for the rest of my life. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I just want you to know that I'm willing to try if you are. With love, Mom." The words left me breathless. There was something different in this message, something genuine. There were no excuses or attempts at manipulation. For the first time, it seemed that she really understood the damage she had caused. That night, I couldn't sleep. I debated whether or not to pick up the phone and call her. In the end, I decided to write her back. Subject: Please listen to me, Mom. Mom, thank you for your message. I'm not going to lie, it has been difficult to read this. I'm angry, I'm hurt, but I also want to believe that things can be different. If you are really willing to talk and not just to justify what happened, I'm open to having that conversation, but I want to make something clear. This won't be easy, and I can't promise anything. Tell me when you're ready, Liam. I didn't know what to expect after sending it, but I felt that I had taken an important, although small, step. The wound was still there, but for the first time in a long time, it seemed possible to start healing. A few days passed before my mom responded to the email. Her message was brief and without embellishments. "Thank you, Liam. I'm ready when you are. Tell me where and when." I decided that the best would be a neutral place, away from the emotional burden of the house or any terrain that could feel like theirs. I chose a quiet cafe in downtown Kansas City. When the day arrived, I arrived early. My mom appeared a few minutes later, looking nervous, something uncommon for a woman who always projected confidence. She sat down in front of me with a cup of tea in her hands, and there was an uncomfortable silence before she spoke. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I know it wasn't easy to accept this." "It wasn't," I admitted without softening it. "But I'm here because I want to understand. I want to know why things happened the way they did." She nodded, staring fixedly at her cup for a moment before looking up. "Liam, when I think about how we treated you, I feel that I failed as a mother. I spent so many years obsessed with the image, with how others saw us, that I forgot what really mattered. I focused so much on Teo because it was easy. He always did what was expected, but you were different." "Different how?" I asked, trying not to sound too aggressive. "You were always more independent," she said with a light melancholic smile. "You didn't need our approval, and that confused me. I felt that if I couldn't control you, then I was losing my role as a mother. So instead of trying to get closer to you, I pushed you further away." I remained silent, processing her words. It was the first time that I had heard something like that from her, and although it didn't erase the pain, at least it began to explain some things. "And Dad?" I asked. "What made him act like he didn't care about me?" She sighed, looking more tired than ever. "Your father has always been proud. I think seeing how you built your life without our help made him feel irrelevant. It's not an excuse, but his way of dealing with that was to belittle you, as if minimizing your achievements could make his seem bigger. That sounds like something he would do." I responded with a bitter laugh. "I know that none of this makes you feel better," she continued, her voice breaking, "but I want you to know that I regret it. I regret every cruel comment, every time I ignored you, every time I made you feel less. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to try." The sincerity in her words disarmed me. It wasn't common for my mom to show vulnerability, and although part of me was still resentful, another part wanted to believe that it could be the beginning of something different. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I said finally, "but I appreciate that you're here and that you're trying." She nodded, tears beginning to fill her eyes. "That's all I can ask." That conversation was the first step towards a relationship that I never thought possible. It wasn't a miracle or an instantaneous turn. It took months of difficult conversations and awkward moments. My dad, however, was a separate case. He never responded to my attempts to talk, and after a while, I stopped trying. I knew that not all ties could be repaired, and I learned to accept that. Teo, for his part, also changed. Shortly after our last conversation, he told me that he and his wife were expecting their first child. He asked me to be an active part in their family's life, and although it took me by surprise, I gladly accepted. I wanted his son to grow up in a different environment than ours, with family ties that weren't marked by favoritism or resentment. As for the house, it became something more than a symbol of my past. After months of renovations, I managed to transform it into a space that felt truly mine. The kitchen, where my mom used to organize dinners to impress her friends, was now a welcoming place where I cooked with my friends and Teo. The backyard, which had been neglected for years, was once again a green place full of life, a space for gatherings and quiet moments. One day, while unpacking the last boxes, I found something that left me speechless. A framed photograph of my grandfather and I, taken the day we built the old desk that my mom had thrown away. I couldn't help but smile. Although many things had been lost, this small relic from the past had survived. I decided to place it in my new office as a reminder of where I came from and how much I had achieved. A year after that coffee with my mom, we organized a Thanksgiving dinner at my house. It was a small event, only with Teo, his wife, and my mom. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but it was a beginning. As we sat around the table, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I don't know if I will ever have a completely functional relationship with my family, and that's okay. What matters is that, for the first time, I feel that I'm living my life on my own terms, and that's something that I never thought I would achieve. Story 6. My parents rejected me as a teenager for not being as talented as my sister, but when they decided to reappear, I introduced them to my new family, and everything ended very badly. My name is Amelia, I'm 23 years old, and I live in the United States on the outskirts of Jacksonville, Florida. But to get to this point, I had to go through a most complicated adolescence in which my parents rejected me and basically kicked me out of the house because I didn't meet family expectations. My parents, James and Charlotte, were always very demanding, especially with me and my older sister, Ella. Between the two of us, she was always the child prodigy, intelligent, quick to learn, especially in math and science, and my parents loved to show off her achievements. Since she was a child, she has been getting diplomas, participating in science contests, and attending academic summer camps, while I stayed at home trying to excel in anything else, without success. Mine was always more artistic: painting, writing, playing the guitar a little. I never stood out enough for them to feel proud of me. My father, James, is a doctor, a cardiology specialist highly respected in our hometown, and my mother, Charlotte, teaches nursing at a nearby community college. They both met in college, so in our house it was almost a dogma that science and medicine were the great vocation to follow. The possibility of a different path was never mentioned. I can't say that I hated science. It just wasn't my thing. Still, they saw me as some kind of walking disappointment. Living like that was exhausting. When I finished 7th grade, my low grades were already a stain on the impeccable record that my parents wanted to flaunt. In fact, more than seeing me as a daughter, they saw me as the one who came to ruin the family reputation. Every now and then I would hear phrases like, "Amelia, why can't you be more like her?" Or, "Don't waste our time. Your sister would never have gotten a 6 on an exam." I know that a 6 isn't excellent, but for me it was progress. I used to get a 4 or 5. I was supposed to feel proud of improving a little, but at home no one valued it. The worst of all came when I turned 14 and was in full adolescence. Imagine: hormones, fights with classmates, exam stress. My mother blamed me that my mediocre grades were a total disgrace. What are our friends going to say when they know your grades, Amelia? I don't even want to imagine the face they'll make. Of course, my parents had a wide social circle full of doctors, professors, and university colleagues. Every meeting seemed to be a competition. My daughter obtained a research award, or my daughter applied to a robotics program at NASA. And meanwhile, I was left in a corner feeling inferior. Every time someone asked, "And Amelia, what is she excelling at?" I could hopefully say that I had participated in a play and received as a response, "Oh, that's interesting," with a look of pity. One night, I argued with my parents because I wanted to enroll in a plastic arts activity at a nearby cultural center. It was after school twice a week. My father told me that it wasn't useful or practical, that I should better invest that time in studying biology and chemistry. My mother nodded in agreement and suggested that that was the only way to save my future. What hurt me the most was that they didn't even bother to see my drawings or ask why I liked art. They limited themselves to saying, "Don't waste money and time, and don't embarrass us." I remember that same week I had a final math exam that, as usual, was complicated for me. I got a regular grade, and my professor Ora Margot offered me extra help in the library, but my parents refused to pick me up later or allow me to stay because they said that it was time for me to learn on my own. Obviously, they didn't let me attend those tutoring hours, and I ended up with an even worse grade. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I argued strongly with my father in the living room. I yelled at him that I couldn't continue with this pressure, and he replied that I was a complete irresponsible and that they couldn't stand my nonsense anymore. He began to hit the table, telling me that I spent my time complaining and that they couldn't stand my nonsense anymore. My mother was behind, arms crossed, nodding to everything my father said and looking at me with cold eyes as if there was nothing redeemable in me. Then the unexpected happened. They punished me. They confiscated my cell phone and told me that I wouldn't leave my room in 2 weeks, not even to watch television on the weekends. I was in shock. I know it sounds silly, but at that time, my world was reduced to school and my friends. Losing contact with them generated a lot of anxiety. That same night, I broke down crying in the kitchen. My sister, Ella, who was 16, tried to calm me down, but at the same time told me, "Don't complicate the lives of mom and dad. You know how they are. Better pretend that you're studying, and that's it." She wasn't bad to me. In fact, she loved me, but it was noticeable that she preferred not to contradict my parents. I don't blame her. With her incredible academic performance, she was the model daughter and feared losing that prestigious position. With the rage that I felt, I did something that I didn't think I would. I wanted to escape from home. As I didn't have my cell phone, I couldn't contact anyone, so I left through the window at around midnight, thinking about sleeping on the street or something like that. It was absurd and dangerous, I know, but my teenage mind didn't allow me to think clearly. I walked to a park in my neighborhood, sat on a bench near the fountain, and felt a strange relief, as if I preferred to be there alone and homeless than to look at my parents' faces again. Fear invaded me later when I realized that I had nowhere to go and no money to eat. At 5 in the morning, the police found me and took me back home. I suppose that my parents were scared enough to call the authorities. I don't know if they preferred me back because they cared about my well-being or to maintain appearances. Upon arriving, my father told me that he was already fed up with me and that he would take action the next day. The next day, they dropped the bomb on me. "You're going to go with your Uncle Nicholas and your Aunt Pauline to their farm in Kentucky for a while. There you'll learn discipline and you won't have so many distractions." I cried, begged not to be separated from my sister, that I would change my attitude, but they were determined. My mother, with a frown, told me that she couldn't stand my failures anymore. That's how the story of my exile began. And to think that my Uncle Nicholas and my Aunt Pauline, whom I barely knew, were the ones who ended up becoming my true parents, but that will come later. At the moment, I felt betrayed, abandoned, and the worst thing was that I couldn't even say goodbye to Ella properly. My sister wrote me a farewell note that she left in my room and that I could read before getting into the car. It told me that she loved me and that she hoped that someday I would return. I kept that note as my most precious gold. The following days were a chaos of suitcases, tears, and uncomfortable silences. My parents didn't even talk to me for more than a couple of minutes, as if they no longer cared about me. They were obsessed with the idea that I was the academic shame of the family and that I wasn't worth fighting for. But what they didn't expect is that a decade later, when they finally felt remorse, they would find me living another life with another family and completely recovered from their contempt. That's where the most interesting part of this story begins, and the reason why everything ended in the worst way. When they returned, the car trip was long, silent, and tense. Neither my father James nor my mother Charlotte opened their mouths more than to say, "Amelia, put on your seatbelt," and minimal things like, "We need to stop to get gas." I stayed in the back seat with swollen eyes from so much crying, clinging to that little note that my sister Ella left me before leaving. I was 14 years old, and I felt like my life was coming to a bitter end. I remember that while we were traveling the highway, I began to seriously wonder if any of this was my fault. I mean, yes, my grades were very low, and I had no interest in medicine. But was that reason enough for my parents to leave me to my fate? When we finally arrived in Kentucky, the first impression I had was that of a place taken from a country postcard. Enormous green fields, cows grazing, a dirt road that led to a picturesque little house, and a red barn on the side. My Uncle Nicholas greeted us with a kind, though somewhat uncomfortable, gesture. My Aunt Pauline was wearing an apron. Apparently she was cooking, and she came out as soon as she heard the car. What moved me the most was that both seemed genuinely happy to see me despite the strange circumstance. My parents talked to them alone for almost half an hour, leaving me sitting on the porch with my suitcase on the side, without even addressing a word to me. I heard them at times raise their voices, especially my father repeating something like, We hope that you will put her on track, but I didn't dare to approach. When they finished, my mother simply said goodbye with a "see you later, Amelia," and my father didn't even look at me. They got back in the car and left without looking back. That engine noise moving away, leaving behind the dust from the road, symbolized in my mind an abrupt cut with my previous life. I remember that same afternoon my Aunt Pauline invited me to go to the kitchen and offered me a glass of lemonade. Typical Southern gesture, but for me it meant the warmest embrace that I had received in years. I tried to contain my tears of rage and sadness, but my aunt spoke to me with sweetness. "My dear girl, don't cry anymore. You're in good hands here. I promise you're going to be all right." My uncle, something more reserved, limited himself to patting me on the back and saying to me, "Look, it may not be easy to adapt to life in the countryside, but we'll give you your space and all the time you need." None of them criticized my grades or gave me superior looks. It was a total relief. In those days, it was hard for me to leave the room that they assigned to me, which was the old guest room next to the staircase. It had been arranged with a quite comfortable bed, a bedside table, and a lamp that gave a warm light. It had a window that looked out onto the pen from where I could see some chickens walking, and in the background you could see the green prados speckled with some cows and horses. I was surprised by how silent everything was in comparison with my house in Florida, where I heard cars, trucks, and sirens almost at any hour. Here you only heard crickets at night and a rooster in the morning. I was nervous because I didn't know how I was going to resume my studies. I thought that my uncle and aunt would force me to study in their way or something like that. But to my surprise, they told me that they were going to enroll me in a public school in the county not very far from there, but that for a few weeks they would let me breath so that I could adapt. That empathy moved me deeply, because in my house everything was "we're in a hurry, you must improve now, don't make us look bad." I was also concerned by the idea of not having access to a phone or internet to talk to my sister in my house. My parents had confiscated my cell, so I arrived at the farm practically incommunicated. Upon noticing my anguish, my uncle Nicholas showed me the landline and told me that I could use it to call her whenever I wanted, as long as the long-distance expenses weren't excessive. I remember that night while having dinner I asked for permission and called my sister in secret. I had to do it at the time in which my parents probably weren't at home, and it turned out she answered crying upon hearing my voice. She told me that she missed me a lot, and I told her that at least it seemed that my uncles were going to be very good to me. She confessed to me that she tried to convince my parents not to send me away, but it was useless. After a while we had to hang up before my parents returned. My uncles had lived on that farm for years, and they had a very marked routine. They would wake up at 5 in the morning to feed the animals and check the fences. For me, it was very hard to wake up early, but they didn't force me to get up so early. Yes, when my classes in the local school began, the thing was going to change. Meanwhile, I entertained myself exploring the property. There was a stable full of horses, some with names. I remember one called Boo that was the favorite of the family. I discovered that I had a certain affinity with the horses. I liked to caress them, feed them with carrots, and sometimes simply observe them. Nobody judged me if I spent hours drawing them in my notebook. I was fascinated by that open-air environment, the smell of hay, and the freedom of being able to walk with boots through the field. My Aunt Pauline noticed my scribbles and asked me one day, "You like to draw, Amelia?" I nodded timidly, and then she sat with me to see my sketches. "You know that the University of the city has a program of art workshops for young people. If you want, we can enroll you." At that moment, my heart almost jumped out of joy. Seriously, someone in my family supported my taste for art. I couldn't believe it. While all this was happening, weeks passed without my parents contacting me. I looked at the landline with anxiety, hoping that at least they would call me to see how I was, but nothing, not a message, not an email. Although I didn't have access to internet, except some specific days in which my uncles took me to the local library, I felt hurt, but I also began to relax without the constant pressure of feeling like a failure. My sister, on the other hand, kept calling me whenever she could, even if it was for a few minutes. She told me that my parents spoke as if I didn't exist, concentrated in her preparing for a state exam that was important to enter a summer research program at the university. When she asked them about me, they barely answered, that they hoped that I was doing well, just like that, without any more interest. I felt a knot in my throat upon hearing that my own family disengaged of me, as if they had crossed me out of their accounting book. However, my uncles saw my suffering and gave me words of encouragement. "Don't drown in what they think of you. Keep going, that we value you here," said Aunt Pauline. After a month, my uncles completed my transfer to the Simpson County High School. It was a small institution where there wasn't the competitive pressure of the one I came from. They introduced me to the counselor, Mrs. Savannah, who greeted me with a wide smile. "Hello, Amelia. Here we are all like a big family. What do you like to do?" I was surprised. Never had an adult in my old school asked me something so simple, but so human. I told her that I liked to draw, and Savin recommended me to join the art club. He said that I shouldn't worry too much about my past grades, that they would do everything possible to help me catch up. At that moment, I felt a warmth in my chest, as if for the first time someone was seeing more beyond my averages. I began to attend classes to relate with new people, and although it was hard at first, because they asked me why I had come from Florida, it wasn't impossible. My uncles took me in their van in the mornings, and I returned in the school bus in the afternoon, generally with some homework and a lot of nerves, but little by little I began to feel more relaxed and even curious to learn. I'm not going to lie, my grades were still normal. I didn't become a perfect student overnight, but at least I no longer felt that heavy gravestone of disappointment on me. Almost 2 months after arriving at the farm, I mustered up the courage to ask my Uncle Nicholas if my parents at some point would speak to me or come to visit me. He let out a sigh and told me something that marked me. "Look, Amelia, I don't want to lie to you. Your parents send money for your food and school, but they haven't shown intentions of coming to see you or taking you back. They have said that it's better that you stay here for an indefinite time." I was silent, feeling a huge emptiness. My father, with his good cardiologist salary, sent a monthly check as if I were one more expense. My mother, for her part, barely sent short notes by email to my Aunt Pauline asking how my grades were, nothing more. That day I cried as I don't remember having cried before, and my uncles consoled me, saying that I could consider their home as mine for as long as I needed it. It was the first time that someone treated me like family without conditions. I was invaded by despair to believe that my parents had discarded me, but at the same time I felt relieved because I didn't have to face that pressure at home. It was a rare mixture of pain and freedom. What I didn't know was that that season at the farm would become several years of a new life full of learnings and, above all, of genuine affection. Despite the changes, the absence of my parents, and the pain that it caused me, I began to flourish, to discover parts of me that I never thought could exist, and the best of all was that I was making friends, receiving good vibes from my uncles, and I had the hope that with time my parents would come to their senses. Maybe they would recognize their mistakes, but that didn't happen so soon. In fact, years passed without me having real contact with them, and when finally the opportunity of reconciliation appeared, everything became very murky. As I had already told you, however, before arriving there, I must tell you how my evolution in the Institute was. My relationship with a very special boy that appeared in my life that would later become my husband, and of course the exact moment in which my sister Ella took the step that would change our lives forever. After spending a month adapting, I was time to formally enter the Simpson County High School. In a principal, I felt totally out of place. I came from a relatively big city like Jacksonville in Florida, and now my reality was a small town with one main street, a couple of family coffee shops, and a service station that at times was filled with tractors more than cars. On the other hand, the school turned out to be small with not very numerous groups, more accessible teachers, and almost everyone knew each other from childhood. On the first day of class, the counselor Savannah, who had already helped me with the transfer, introduced me to several classmates. It was the first time that I experienced the typical new student in a small town, because almost all looked at me with curiosity. Some asked me questions a little rare, as if I were a city girl full of eccentricities, but soon I made friends with a girl named Lucy, very cheerful and good people, who invited me to sit next to her at lunch. She was part of the art club and spoke to me of the professor who directed it, Mrs. Harper, who organized weekly activities. Lucy insisted that I join since she had heard me say that I liked to draw without hesitation. I accepted. It was the first time that I found a space where my artistic inclinations weren't seen as a waste of time. That same week, I went to the art club, and I was speechless with the small room filled with paintbrushes, oils, drawing notebooks, and reproductions of famous works on the walls. Professor Harper was a petite woman with gray hair and an eternal smile that greeted me with a "So you're the girl that comes from Florida and loves to draw horses?" I laughed nervously, but I felt confident. I showed her some sketches of the horses that my uncle had on the farm, and she was delighted. "Amelia, you have a very expressive stroke. Have you taken formal drawing classes?" When I responded that I hadn't, put a surprised face and said, "Well, here you can learn all you want." I felt for the first time that someone saw potential in my drawings. Meanwhile, on the farm, my days had become a tranquil routine. Wake up early, not as much as my uncles that left at 5 in the morning, feed animals, take the school bus at 7, return around 3 in the afternoon, and in the afternoons help a little in the stable or in the garden. My uncles never forced me to do anything, but I offered myself to collect eggs, to water the garden, or to order the barn, to not feel like a useless tenant. The contact with the animals was transformed into a wonderful therapy. Talking to the cows or brushing the horses relaxed me and inspired me to keep drawing. At times I would sit near the field to see the sunset and scribble ideas in my notebook. It was there where I met a particular horse called Ranger that became my favorite. He wasn't the biggest nor the fastest, but he followed me like a puppy when I walked by the pen. I began to outline stories in which Ranger was the protagonist, and this motivated me even to write small stories. My uncles noticed my sudden creative enthusiasm and encouraged me. Keep going, Amelia. If this makes you happy, don't stop doing it. It was incredible the difference with my parents, who would have said something like, "This is useless, better study chemistry." When I had already had a couple of months of classes, I knew a group of friends with whom I made art and literature projects. There was Lucas, a boy that dreamed of being a writer, and I connected quick because we both preferred to be in a cafeteria drawing or writing instead of going to the typical parties of the school. There was also Jaisal, that was good in theater and always dramatized any scene of daily life. With Lucy, we formed a quite creative quartet, and we self-denominate the Club of Free Expression. However, the person that marked me the most was a student a little older than me, Oliver, that would sign up from time to time to the activities of the art club. He was 16 for 17 years. I was 15 at that moment. He was tall with brown hair, and he was good at sculpture. Our first interaction was quite funny. He saw me drawing a sketch of Ranger and told me, "Hey, is that a dog or a horse?" I thought that he was mocking me, but it turned out that he had a quite strange sense of humor, and after explaining, he apologized with a nervous laugh. With time, we began to talk more, and I taught him to ride a horse at my uncle's farm. When he approached a weekend, he in return taught me to model clay and to use sculpture tools. Ours was only friendship at that time, but it was noticeable, a certain spark, I won't deny it. Oliver had a sweet and clueless attitude that I found captivating. Despite the mathematics still not being my strong suit, at least I didn't feel constantly pressured. The grades went up enough so that I stopped seeing them as an enemy, expressively up, until I started to pay more attention in biology, especially in topics about animals and ecology that at the farm felt very close to my day-to-day. My uncle Nicholas explained to me many things about the care of horses, common diseases in cows, and how the diet influenced the health of the cattle. That was my way of connecting science with something that I loved, and little by little I realized that I wasn't silly. I simply needed a different approach and an interest that motivated me. Every now and then my Aunt Pauline and my uncle spoke of my parents. "Have they called you? Did they tell you anything?" I always denied with my head, and they sighed with a face of resignation. They had realized that my parents, more than being interested in how I felt, only worried about sending the monthly check. Still, my uncles never spoke badly of them in front of me. They would tell me, "Keep going with your life, Amelia. Don't live waiting for the approval of anyone else." That phrase became my mantra. However, my sister Ella, that now was 16, almost 17, kept being my biggest tie with my old house. She would call me every time she could, even if it was for a few minutes. She told me that my parents were proud that she had entered a scientific research program in her school that surely would put her in the spotlight of several prestigious universities. She at times felt guilty because she was doing well while I was far, but I repeated to her that it wasn't her fault. I even told her that I was glad to know that at least someone in the family fulfilled our parents' expectations, and so they wouldn't be so frustrated. In any way, my sister and I agreed to keep maintaining contact in secret because my parents preferred that she focused in her studies instead of talking to me. They considered her a diamond and to me a shapeless stone, corny and sad at the same time, but that was their mentality. I remember one day when she told me, "Amelia, Mom and Dad are planning to move to another city to follow their career in a bigger hospital. It seems that there is no plan for you to return. How do you feel about that?" I was silent. It was the confirmation that they had erased me from their life as if I didn't exist. It was hard, but at the same time, I felt a respite knowing that at least I didn't have to return to a home in which I never fit. Among the good things that began to happen to me, there was a youthful art exhibition in the nearest city, Bowling Green, where Professor Harper encouraged us to participate. I took a big sketch of Ronner grazing and a simple painting of a sunrise in the farm. I didn't expect great thing, but to my surprise, my work was mentioned with an honorary mention. I didn't win the first place, But to see my name on the list of acknowledgments made my heart jump. It was the first time in my life that someone recognized a talent of mine. My Aunt Pauline celebrated it more than I, telling me, "See, you had artistic wit since the beginning." That night my Uncle Nicholas prepared a homemade cake to celebrate, and so the days passed. I finally felt that I belonged to some place. As time passed, my life became more and more stable and tranquil at the farm. I learned to love the silences of the field, that starry sky, without light pollution, and the singing of the crickets that accompanied me in my drawing nights. For the first time, I felt valued and loved, although at times the sadness of knowing that my biological parents weren't there to share it would loom. But my uncle and aunt became my pillars. They demonstrated to me daily that family isn't always the one that raises you from the cradle, but the one that welcomes you without conditions. Meanwhile, my sister kept updating me on everything. My parents had effectively moved to a suburb of Nashville, Tennessee, so that my father could continue developing his cardiology career. She would stay with them until graduating. Nothing was mentioned about me. It hurt me to think that if it weren't for her, I would have disappeared completely from their mental map. However, I purposed myself not to be filled with rancor. If someday my parents appeared asking for forgiveness, I wanted to be strong enough to listen to them and not feel that their rejection had dictated my fate. For now, I had a true home in Kentucky, a school where I was happy, a handful of good friends, a passion for the art, and up to the incipient friendship with Oliver that promised to transform my teenage heart. What I didn't know was that in a matter of a couple of years, even more drastic changes would occur. The graduation of Ella, the moment in which I would begin to go out formally with Oliver, and the crucial decisions that would take us to the university and to adulthood. Each step that I took moved me further from my old life until suddenly my parents wanted to reappear. As I turned 16, I felt that my routine in the farm had become something similar to a peaceful dream. I no longer felt burdened to get up early to help with the tasks of the stable. I even used to accompany my Uncle Nicholas to check the fences and the paddocks while he explained to me, with a lot of patience, how the breeding cycles of horses and cows worked. I remember the sunrises painted of an orange tone that seemed to come out of a painting. Those moments ended up awakening my artistic passion. I filled whole notebooks with drawings and paintings of rural landscapes. Oliver began to visit me some weekends, and a principal, he only came to practice horse riding, or rather to see if he managed to get on a horse without putting on a comic show. To my surprise, he was getting better at it, and with the passing of the months, it became a familiar scenario to see him jogging behind me. He also got along very well with my uncles. He was educated. He asked them questions about the farm, and at times he offered to help my Aunt Pauline in the kitchen. When we returned from riding, we ended up in the kitchen, all four of us drinking sweet tea and laughing at silly anecdotes of the day. In an environment like that, it was logical that my bond with Oliver deepened. Soon those shared laughs became complicit glances. I will never forget the day in which, while of adolescent dating, quite sweet, neither of us had much experience, but we understood each other well. We shared artistic tastes, and it made us happy to be together. One afternoon when I was around 16 and a half, my Aunt Pauline called me to tell me that my parents had phoned. My soul almost fell to the floor. It was the first time that they showed something similar to interest in more than 2 years. However, my aunt warned me that they had only asked about my grades and if I was behaving well, without uttering a word of affection or regret. I felt annoyed, but also with a tremendous curiosity. Why were they choosing to contact just now? My Uncle Nicholas passed me the phone, and I heard my mother Charlotte's voice with a tone so cold that I thought it was a stranger. "Amelia," she told me. "How are your studies going? We got the report that your grades have improved." I barely managed to respond. "Yes, I'm well. I'm not the best of the class, but I'm not failing anything anymore." My mother made a dry comment. "Well, I'm glad. Your father and I were worried." Followed her silence indicated to me that she didn't have much more to say. I wanted to ask her why they never called me before, but I didn't dare to expect that at least my father James would grab the phone and say something kind, but it didn't occur. He told me a quick, "Hello, daughter, keep it up," and that was it. No trace of a "we miss you" or "we're sorry." That call only lasted a few minutes, and it left me with a bittersweet taste. Yes, they had communicated, but it seemed more like a formality to confirm that I wasn't a total disaster. On the other hand, my sister Ella, that already was 17, almost 18, shined academically, and was about to graduate with honors from the high school in Nashville where my parents had moved. She prepared to enter a prestigious university. In our telephonic contact, she would confess to me that she hated to see how our parents still pretended that I didn't exist, or that I was the stray daughter that corrected herself halfway. textual words that my father dropped in some meeting, according to my sister, stray daughter. I repeated indignantly when she told me. I swear that I fought with them, Amelia. I told them that they shouldn't express themselves like that of you, that you have demonstrated a lot of maturity, but they don't listen to me. For them, you're out of the equation. Still, Ella did what she could to keep us united. She asked me to go to her graduation, but I felt too uncomfortable to face my parents. Besides, it would be celebrated in Nashville, where they lived, and I had no idea how they would react. If I presented myself, the idea of seeing their faces of reproach, of faking everything, is all right. When it wasn't, I was terrified. However, my Uncle Nicholas and my Aunt Pauline encouraged me. Look, is your sister, and although your parents don't appreciate you, she deserves you to support her. Haven't you considered assisting? After meditating it, I decided that I wouldn't assist physically because I didn't feel ready for that reunion. However, Ella had a beautiful gesture. She organized a video call with the help of her phone and the one of a friend right after the ceremony, so that I could see her with her beret and her gown. There I saw her radiant, holding her diploma. I cried upon congratulating her while my uncles applauded from the distance. It was a bittersweet moment because I would have loved to hug her, but I didn't want to run into my parents. My turn to graduate would arrive later, given that I was a year younger than her. As my pre-university year approached, the idea of going to the university began to take force. Professor Harper and the counselor Savannah encouraged me to look at options of bachelor's in plastic arts or graphic design in home. My uncles told me that if I really wanted to continue studying, they would support me in what I needed. That filled me with pride and emotion, but there also arose doubts. What if I'm not good? What if I spend my life trying and I don't achieve anything remarkable? However, in the bottom, I felt that I wanted to dedicate myself to art, or at least something creative. Then Oliver, that was a year above me, graduated and left to a university in Bowling Green to study art history and sculpture. Our relationship became something long distance, although we kept seeing each other on the weekends when he returned to the town. It was a difficult transition, but we wanted to fight for ours. That distance also made me reflect about which path I would follow once I finished prepa. Just when my life was relatively under control, something happened that caught me by surprise. My parents presented themselves without prior notice at my uncle's farm one Saturday in the afternoon. I was almost 17 years old at that moment, and it had been more than 2 years that I hadn't seen them in person. I remember perfectly being on the porch fixing an easel to paint when I saw a white sedan park at the entrance from it. My parents got down, both with gestures of discomfort. My Aunt Pauline peeked perplexed, and my Uncle Nicholas came out to greet them with his hand. There wasn't even a kind hello. My mother looked me up and down and dropped. Amelia, you have grown. The tension could be cut with a knife. I didn't know if I should hug them or move away. Finally, I only said, good afternoon. My father, with his typical stiff composure, cleared his throat and dropped something like, can we come in? We want to talk. I was speechless, but my uncles made a démarche so that we entered the room. There a conversation began that I had imagined hundreds of times, but that in reality was completely anticlimactic. They spoke of how they thought that it was time for me to return with them to prepare the entrance exams for the university. Seriously, they also mentioned that if I stopped wasting time with the art and focused in more useful subjects, I could aspire to scholarships in medicine or engineering. That chat made me feel resentment, pain, and on top of that, the necessity to leave things clear. My Uncle Nicholas, that stayed calm almost the whole conversation, intervened. Amelia is who must decide her path. We have seen her grow and flourish here. If she wants to study art, we will make it possible. My parents put a bad face. It was noticeable that that posture didn't like them at all. My mother, with her frivolous tone, dropped. This little farm game was enough. We want that Amelia to take advantage of her real potential. And their friends explode. My real potential? You haven't even called in more than 2 years to know if I was alive, and now you come to tell me what to do with my life. I don't understand. I raised my voice, something that I rarely did in front of my uncles. My parents looked at each other without knowing what to answer. At the end, my father said something like, we knew that you were in a safe place. We thought that now was the moment to intervene. That phrase seemed so cynical to me that I felt nauseous. The visit concluded in the worst way. My parents left without reaching any agreement. My Uncle Nicholas and my Aunt Pauline were visibly upset, and I was left with a knot in my throat. It was the confirmation that my parents still saw me as a mistake to correct more than as a person with their own dreams. There was no hug of goodbye, nor we're proud of you, or anything remotely similar. They limited themselves to get in the car and leave with the promise of contacting me soon, but that soon became months of silence. Again, I was fed up while feeling that my future hung from a thread between two worlds, the one that my uncles told me, full of freedom and love, and the one that my parents pretended to force, marked by the academic prestige and the appearances. However, I didn't imagine what was coming: a reunion still more uncomfortable in the moment in which I had already formed my own new family. And it is that when my parents returned to burst into my life, they not only found me about to graduate, they also found me with a commitment ring and a pregnancy that would change the whole panorama. When I turned 18, I graduated officially from the Simpson County High School. It was a day of mixed feelings. I was saying goodbye to my favorite professors, my classmates from the art club, and the rural warmth of Kentucky that had comforted me so much. But at the same time, I was taking a big step forward. My Aunt Pauline and my Uncle Nicholas attended my ceremony, and they were very proud of me. Although my grades weren't brilliant, if I graduated with a more than decent record, and my artistic portfolio opened me the door to enter the University of Western Kentucky in Bowling Green, where there was a plastic arts program that excited me a lot. My sister Ella wanted to come too, but my parents forbade her. Still, she sent me a voice message congratulating me and telling me that whatever happened, she would always be on my side. By those dates, Oliver, who was a year older than me, was finishing his first university cycle in that same institution, so my arrival facilitated things to see each other more often. We decided that to save expenses, we would share a small apartment near the campus. I consulted my uncles, and although they felt a little bit of nostalgia because I was moving away from the farm, they supported me without reserves and offered me financial help to cover part of the rent. With that support, I felt like the world was smiling at me. The university experience was wonderful. I met new people, I immersed myself in painting, sculpture, and photography workshops, and I was lucky that Oliver and I shared a compatible schedule to have lunch together in the campus cafeteria. It was the first time that I had such a great respite from all the family drama. For almost 2 years, my parents didn't show their faces in my life. They sent a symbolic amount of money to my uncles, each time less, by the way, and they didn't seem interested in my progress. I, for my part, focused on classes and on my relationship with Oliver, who became my inseparable companion. When I was 20, Oliver proposed marriage to me. It was a scene taken from my most romantic dream. We were at a lake near the campus having a picnic at sunset, and suddenly he knelt down, holding a ring quite simple, but with a precious shine. He told me that he couldn't imagine his life without me, that every day that we spent together, he felt more convinced that we were meant for each other. Obviously, I said yes. I felt such a great happiness that I couldn't wait to tell my uncles and Ella. The first to know was my sister, who was very excited. She was already 21 and was in her penultimate university year in North Carolina. She continued with minimal contact with my parents, but she was determined not to allow them to control her life. She told me, "Promise me that you'll let me be a bridesmaid at your wedding." We laughed, and I responded that, of course, that wasn't even asked. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but a few weeks after my engagement, something happened that, although full of joy, complicated our world of young students. I found out that I was pregnant. The test gave positive amid a start of dizziness and strange cravings that had assaulted me in the last days. I was 20 years old and was in the middle of my plastic arts university program. Oliver was 21, finishing his in art history. The news left us with our hearts beating 1,000 miles an hour. We had a long conversation. Were we prepared to be parents and to finish the university? But after the initial nerves, we knew that we wanted to form a family. And so, with the help of my uncles and the optimism that characterizes us, we began to plan that new life. Upon telling it to my uncles, far from getting angry, they were happy. "If it's what you both want, we're here to support you," my Aunt Pauline told me with tearful eyes of joy. We decided that the best thing was to have a simple and quick ceremony to formalize things. We didn't have much money for a big wedding, so we thought of something small, and what better place than my uncle's farm, that site where my life was reborn years ago. It was an intimate event, with just our closest friends from the university and some neighbors from the area. My sister Ella traveled from North Carolina to be my bridesmaid. She looked radiant, and she was so happy to see me happy. On the day of the wedding, I had a panic attack when thinking that maybe my parents could appear by surprise, as they had done before, but they didn't. They never called to congratulate me. They didn't even send a message. My sister confessed to me that she had invited them and had told them that it would be important for me to see them, but they had responded with evasiveness and ended up not assisting. It was sad. However, I didn't let that ruin my day. I decided to focus on the love that surrounded me, in the affectionate words of my uncles, in the excitement of my friends, and in Oliver's eternal smile, who took my hand during the whole ceremony. A few months after getting married, I gave birth to my son Samuel. It was a relatively tranquil delivery in a hospital in Bowling Green. The simple act of seeing his little face made me feel that everything had been worth it. Each tear, each family rejection, each early morning at the farm had been part of a journey that led me to this moment of fullness. Oliver and I, despite being young parents, were committed to finishing the university as it may be. My uncles kept helping us economically and taking care of the baby occasionally. Between all of us, we formed some kind of team, and so I managed to adapt to my new reality. My sister Ella would come to visit us when she could. She would bring little gifts for Samuel, and she would stay some days taking advantage of her university vacations. My parents, on the other hand, didn't show any interest. I was already so accustomed to their coldness that I preferred not to delude myself with the idea that they would change. I never thought that suddenly they would announce their desire to reconnect. One day, when my baby was a month old, my sister let me know that my parents planned to contact me. She didn't have clear details, she only knew that suddenly they seemed to feel some remorse. And so I received a short message on social media, because they didn't even have the deference to call me directly, where they asked me, "Can we visit you to see how you're doing? We'd like to see you." Not an apology, not a "how's your baby doing?" or something affectionate. It felt like a protocol act, but I decided that I would invite them to have dinner at my house, the one that I shared with Oliver very near to my uncle's. The idea of that dinner arose as some kind of catharsis. I wanted to demonstrate to them that without them my life had flourished. So, in a fit of courage mixed with pride, I cited them for the weekend and invited also my uncle Nicholas, my aunt Pauline, my sister Ella of course, my husband Oliver, and my son Samuel. I didn't tell my uncles that my parents would come, so when they saw James and Charlotte's car arrive, they were astonished. The meeting began tense. My parents entered, saw my husband and my baby, and they became very uncomfortable. They discovered in that instant that I was married and that they had a 1-month-old grandson. None of the two knew this for sure, although my sister suspects that my father intuited it. My mother sat on the sofa as if she were a guest in the house of a stranger. My father, always with his superb attitude, limited himself to looking around in silence. My uncle Nicholas and my aunt Pauline stayed standing without knowing if they should greet them or ignore them. My sister Ella, trying to break the tension, said, "Well, at least we are all reunited, I suppose." When I served dinner, I decided to give a small speech of gratitude to my uncles, to my husband, and to my sister who had sustained me and loved me during these years. I spoke of my graduation from Prepa, of how they supported me in the university, of my passion for art, and of the happiness that I felt with my baby in my arms. I emphasized that each one of them had supplanted the void that someone else left. Not a word of acknowledgement was directed to my parents because I had nothing to thank them for. The truth, I could say that it was an epic moment and a little cruel at the same time. While I was speaking, my parents remained with their gaze nailed on the plate without daring to interrupt. At the end of my debriefing, I turned towards them and dropped the phrase that unleashed everything. "And now, Mom and Dad, I would like to officially introduce you to the family that you didn't want to be part of." The silence became eternal. My mother broke into tears. She stood up from the table and ran out of the house without even her purse. My father directed at me a gaze between rage and disappointment and went after her without saying goodbye to anyone. We stayed in the room with a knot in the throat without knowing what to say. Someone moved to pick up the plates, but the discomfort was total. There was no dessert or coffee. We all opted to finish the night in silence. Later, my sister told me that she believed that I had gone too far. My husband Oliver opined the same. "If you didn't want to see them, you should have avoided it. But inviting them to rub in their faces your happiness was a bit harsh." I myself felt confused and with a mixture of relief and guilt. On the one hand, I had said what I felt from the depths of my heart, that they abandoned me and that those that did love me were others. On the other hand, was so much drama necessary? I don't know. After that episode, my parents disappeared again. The only one that kept in contact with me was Ella, who assured that my parents had no intention of apologizing and that instead, they felt humiliated. Despite everything, my uncles and my sister continue supporting me, and they understand that my life belongs now to this new nucleus that I have formed with Oliver and my son Samuel. I'm happy, yes I am. I feel certain remorse for the way in which I handled the dinner too, but I can't ignore the fact that my parents abandoned me at age 14. They cut me off from their life for years, and they only appeared to demand that I follow their plans. Now that I think about it, there was no perfect way to resolve so much accumulated tension.